Good morning. Can you all hear? Can you hear me okay? Okay, good. Just you'll have to make a face or some hand motions if you can't hear us. I know. It's so nice to hear conversation and laughter and connection in the room, even before we've officially kicked the meeting off. That's in many ways, I think, the most important part of these meetings. I hope that everyone learns a lot and takes a lot home with them. But the main thing we hear from patients year after year is it's the connections that you make here. When you have a rare disease like ocular melanoma, as we all know, those connections can be hard to come by, especially in person. So please lean into that as you want to and feel comfortable this weekend. We hope we've planned some times in there for that, but if you need to create more time for yourselves, feel free to do that. So I'm standing up here with Miriam Kadosh, who's the Director of Education and Patient Engagement at the Melanoma Research Foundation. And I should have introduced myself. I'm Sarah Seelig, and together with my husband, Greg Strax, we founded the Cure-OM initiative, actually when he was a patient here at Dana-Farber. And I'll tell you a little more about our story when we go through our slides and tell you a little bit more about the organization. So before we do that, we are so lucky to have 3 of our partner hosts with us today, who just wanted to say a quick hello to all of you, and so you'll know who's in the room. And then we'll go through a few other kind of logistics for the meeting and give you some background about the organization, and then jump into the agenda. So Dr. Kim?
Good morning. I'm Ivana Kim. I'm an ocular oncologist at Mount Sinai. This is my colleague.
Hi, I'm Frances Wu. Nice to meet you all.
Yeah, we just want to say we're so honored to be able to partner with MRF and Cure-OM to host this meeting here. And you know, it's great to see a lot of patients and family members here. We hope you really enjoy the weekend. We're honored to be able to co-host this with like all our colleagues in Boston who, you know, we're saying we're so busy doing our own thing that we don't ever actually have the opportunity to meet together, and to be able to all be here in this room together for this kind of cause is really wonderful. So I am glad to see you all here and hope you get a lot out this weekend.
Good morning. I'm Shilpa Desai. I do ocular oncology and retina at Tufts Medical Center, which is called New England Eye Center, is the ophthalmology department there. And I work with a team in radiation oncology, Dr. Julian Wu and Dr. John Mignano. So very happy to be here for the first time, and I'm happy to meet you all.
Good morning. I'm Riz Haq. I'm here at Dana-Farber, and I want to just extend my warmest welcome to you all, near and far, and I think virtual and in person. I hope you have a great meeting today. We're here not only for you to learn, but for us to learn from you. So please engage with us, you know, in the sessions, in the hallways, wherever. We really want your feedback. Thank you.
Thank you all. And thanks for mentioning the folks online. We're just a special welcome to everyone online too. I'm sure at least some of them would like to be here in person, but couldn't make it. So we're glad they're able to join online. And I think you can tell we have been able to work with some pretty amazing partners to plan this weekend for all of you. And I think there'll be people kind of coming and going, but feel free to stop anybody or, you know, sit down at lunch with somebody you have a question for. I think there'll be some informal times to interact over the course of the weekend too. And maybe just point out MRF staff so that you know who MRF staff are here. Arnice Brooks is a member of our communications team, and we're thrilled to have her here. So if you see her snapping pictures, maybe asking you for a little testimonial, or if you have ideas take them to, our niece. You've probably interacted with her, even if you didn't know it, if you've been on our website, if you've received a newsletter, if you've been on social media. Our niece is often at the other end of those pieces. So go say hi to our niece. She'd love to meet you, love to hear your ideas, and potentially love to take a picture. And you met Miriam Kadosh. And then we have Ryan Daniels. Are you in the back of the room? Who is a new member of our team. We're so excited to have her. And she is an education and patient engagement coordinator focused on the rare melanomas. So about half our time is with Cure-OM and ocular melanoma patients. So please welcome Ryan into the community, and she wants to learn and hear from you. And then we have Janelle Daly, who she might still be outside the door, but please say hi and thank you to Janelle. You also have probably interacted with her a lot just by the fact that you're in this room. Behind the scenes, Janelle has done all the logistics to make this meeting run smoothly. So we want to thank Janelle for all of her hard work. So with that, I think Miriam and I are going to go through just a few slides about the MRF and Cure-OM, just so you know a little bit about the organization to set the stage for the weekend. And then we will kind of dive into the agenda from there. Also, we want to have a real big thank you to our sponsors. Without our sponsors, this meeting could not happen. So you can see we have a lot of people supporting the meeting, in turn supporting you all. And this team of organizations really believes in educating and engaging patients and arming you with the information you need to know to make the best decisions for your care. So we really thank our sponsors. Do you want to go through a little bit of the
Sure.
schedule?
So we're going to quickly talk about the schedule for the weekend, but we'll talk about it a lot more and make a few announcements as we go. But I first want to announce that if anyone is going to speak or respond or ask a question, please do speak into the microphones. We'll be running them around to you, but for the online folks and for folks in the room to be able to hear us, we got to use the mics. So I wanted to make that quick announcement. I also wanted to say that on each of your tables, there is a question to spark conversation. So we hope that you'll use those to break the ice and interact with one another. And also, if you want to switch questions with another table, you're welcome to do that as well. We also know that this is going to be a busy weekend, so full day of sessions today. Track 1 is going to be in this room that we're sitting in now, and track 2 is going to be out the doors to the right and make another right back to where the inn at Longwood is. It's the hotel area, and then it's called the Fenway Room. It's still on the same floor. It's across from the bathrooms. So if you need help finding track 2, we can help you, but there might be a lot of back and forth from here to there to go to both sessions. So in your program, you'll be able to see all of the tracks, all of the sessions that will be happening today. And track 1 will start at 10:30 a.m. in here and in the Fenway Room. So if you have any questions about where to find it or what session is happening, just find one of us and we'll be happy to help you find your way. A few announcements about tomorrow. For those who are joining us for Miles for Melanoma, our 5K walk run, which will be held at the Franklin Park Zoo, we ask that you meet in the lobby of the hotel for transportation at 6:30 a.m. Very excited to have all of you join us for that. Then we'll have some time at the Franklin Park Zoo after the race, and then we'll depart from the zoo at 11:30 to come back here for lunch. And then if you're joining us for the duck tour, which we're really excited about, that'll be at 1:30. We'll meet in the lobby at 1:30 p.m. to grab the bus for that, and then come back for dinner at 6:30. I'll hold Science Sunday for just a bit and give you some more announcements on that later. It's just some logistical things to get us all in the right place. But for now, we will tell you a little bit about why we're here and get started.
And one other just quick comment. as Mary mentioned, and you can tell by looking at the agenda, it is a really packed agenda. And we know that it can be a really emotional time. Everyone's coming into this room from different places, different experiences in life, and different experiences and relationships with this disease. My water's, yeah, thank you. So we just want to make sure that you guys pace yourselves in whatever way feels right to you. All of these sessions are recorded. So if you need to step out in the middle of a session, you can watch the rest of it online. If you need to skip a session altogether and you think when you get home, I should have seen that session, you can see it online. But take care of yourselves, pace yourselves. And if you need to leave the room and you don't want to leave alone, you can bring one of us. You've just been introduced to the MRF staff. You can bring any of us. I also want to introduce Molly Facino in the back of the room, a social worker joining us from Thomas Jefferson University, who's helped us with a lot of track 2 sessions. You could grab Molly, grab a friend, or walk out if you need to. And we just want to make this a space where people can feel they can come and go as is comfortable for you. So just to make that additional comment. All right. It's too much up here. So we're going to talk a little bit about the MRF, the Melanoma Research Foundation, which is the parent organization for CureOM. And we thought we'd just give you a little sense of the MRF, and then we'll talk in a little more depth about the Cure Ocular Melanoma Initiative. And both initiatives were founded by a patient and a spouse. And so the MRF was founded by Dana Ashby, who was a melanoma survivor, and she was frustrated with the lack of research in the field. And so she and her husband, Captain Jeff Ashby, founded the MRF and really saw it as an avenue to fund research. Sadly, Diana died shortly after the MRF was founded. Her husband, Captain Jeff Ashby, has stayed involved off and on through the years. But we think a lot about them because without them, we wouldn't be here. You can see the history and mission of the MRF. The mission of the MRF, you'll see, is very similar to the mission of CureOM, just more focused on ocular melanoma. So to eradicate melanoma by accelerating medical research while educating to and advocating for the melanoma community. So we think of research, education, and advocacy as our 3 pillars. And you may hear some of those themes over the course of this weekend. So from being alone and scared, as I'm sure Diana and Jeff were, these are just a few pictures of the MRF's footprint today. And some of the pictures have the OM community in them. So the OM community, while CureOM was founded later in the MRF's history, the OM community has really been integrated throughout the organization. So for our research pillar, we do a number of different things in research. One of the things we do, and you'll hear more about this throughout the weekend, is we have peer-reviewed, grant-funded research opportunities. And so you can see some kind of stats here of how many grants have been funded, how much money, and how that money has been spent with different breakdowns of different types of awards that have been given. You will hear a little more about some specific grants in ocular melanoma, and in fact, a team science award that, thanks to the generosity of a particular family who raised the money for a team science award in ocular melanoma. It just so happens that Dr. Hawk here is part of a team that was awarded that grant just a few months ago. So you will be getting a chance to walk through the lab on Sunday of our newest grant recipient. And again, this is a peer review process, and just by chance, we had already planned the meeting here when we found out that he had been chosen by the peer review panel. So that's exciting, and we'll learn more on Sunday. So then we have patient education and support initiatives. So this slide actually is specific to OM. And so the backbone of our education and support for CureOM is our annual Eyes on a Cure Symposium, where you are sitting right now. And this is something that we hold every year, and we move around each year to partner with a different academic institution. One, to make it more accessible to patients who live all over. And two, early on, we found that in some centers that don't have good clinical integration for ocular melanoma patients, sometimes in the wake of our meetings, they tell us, oh, we had never met the surgeon who sees our patients when we send them across the road. And so we were getting feedback that in the wake of our meetings, we were actually leaving more cohesive and unified clinical teams for the patients there. So for those two reasons, mainly, we move the meeting around to different centers around the country. And next year, I don't know if we're announcing that now or not, but stay tuned, you'll learn more. Next year, we've actually identified our meeting will be in Cleveland in partnership with the Cleveland Clinic and Dr. Arun Singh, and in April, right? Yep. So we'll tell you more about that this weekend as well. We also have a number of other patient education resources. If you're interested in any of these and don't know how to access them, please stop any of us over the course of this weekend. As I mentioned, all of these sessions are recorded. All of our past sessions from past meetings have been recorded. We have webinars. We have a number of print materials. We have virtual support groups. We can get you information about those, and you'll learn more about the Vision platform throughout the weekend as well. And this is the flyer for this weekend's events. Do you want to talk about melanoma education?
So I'm going to orient you a little bit to our education program, and you're at one right now. But you can find all of our recorded content from all of our patient meetings and our Ask the Expert webinars. We do those once a month on our learning platform. So if you go to our website, melanoma.org, you can go and click into melanoma education and then the Education Institute, where you can find all of our education materials and our animated patient videos. Every time I say a P. So our educational materials, we have 25 physical pieces of literature that you can order or download, and it's education materials that you can bring to your doctor's office. A lot of care clinics will order materials, or schools, or different places. We have information on prevention for cutaneous melanoma and for children as well. So all of that is on our website. And our animated patient videos are located on our website. And these are short animations, about 6 to 7 minutes, but really help break down these topics. And so far we have clinical trials. That's our newest module. Understanding melanoma, diagnosing, TIL cell therapy, genetic mutations, and treating melanoma. And then this upcoming year, we're going to be doing our 7th module. Here's our learning platform where you can see all of our videos. And then some of you may know or not know, but we have a patient forum on our website where patients can write in questions and communicate. It's kind of like a message board where you can have conversations with folks, ask questions, create community, and provide support to others. Just a little snippet from our Ask the Expert webinar series. We always have a physician or expert in this specific topic and a patient speak as well. Turn it over to you. And one more thing I wanted to mention, we also have an Ask a Nurse program. So she is on call for us. And if you have any questions that you would like to ask a nurse, you could always send her an email or give her a call. And it's askanurse@melanoma.org is the email address, askanurse@melanoma.org.
Great. Thanks, Miriam. So just like Miriam is the director of education for the MRF, one of our other pillars, as you may remember from the mission, is advocacy. So we have Kim Watkins, who was at the meeting last year, if some of you were there and had the chance to meet her. She's not able to join us this year, but she runs a very strong advocacy program. She runs Hill Day. She helps us look at different state level advocacy initiatives, Tanning Bed, banning, a lot of different issues. So if that's something of interest, and we'll talk in some of the CureOM slides a little bit of how that's trickled down to the OM community. But if you have any interest in getting more involved in advocacy, we can certainly connect you to Kim. She's always looking for more ocular melanoma patients to get involved in state work, and then to join Hill Day, which is once a year in DC as well. And then we have a number of different prevention and awareness campaigns. Some of you may be aware of the Get Naked campaign. May is Melanoma Awareness Month. And so this is a big campaign that our communications team is running this month. We also have awareness campaigns, since we don't know how to prevent necessarily the rare subtypes. So we have an Out of the Shadows campaign for mucosal melanoma, Spot the Dog campaign for pediatric melanoma to help patients learn how to spot concerning areas on the skin. And then we have the I Get Dilated campaign for ocular melanoma, which we talk a little bit about on social media in the month of May for Melanoma Awareness Month, but our real campaign is in November. And a team member picked November many years ago because that's when people still have healthcare spending dollars left, so they can still get their eye exams in towards the end of the year. But if you have a better suggestion for the month of the year, we should hold that in, let us know. So I think this slide is just showing some of our cutting edge programming that might not fit clearly under one of those pillars. You'll hear me talk a little bit more about our Vision platform and Vision registry. And on that platform, we actually have a discussion board specific to ocular melanoma patients. And Neil and I are going to do a presentation on Sunday about that. And I would love it even to just have an informal conversation and get feedback from all of you on that. We're just about to do a launch of a new interface with patients that we hope will be much easier and accessible for you to use those tools. So stay tuned to that. We'll talk more about that on Sunday, or find me anytime this weekend if you want to chat one-on-one before then. And then we have another couple initiatives. We have an MRF Breakthrough Consortium, which brings together different melanoma centers from around the country to coordinate on clinical trials, to coordinate on research, et cetera. And then, as you heard a little bit on the slide before, we have sort of a growing mucosal melanoma initiative that in many ways they're learning from what we've done in the ocular space for how to really advocate and serve the needs of patients with mucosal melanoma. So I think that brings us to some CureOM slides, and I think we're way over, so I will try to go through these quickly. But as you heard me say, I co-founded CureOM with my husband, Greg. We met in Colorado and moved to Boston for me to do my residency here just at Brigham and Women's Hospital, which is just next door. My office is kind of across the street here. And it was in my intern year that Greg was diagnosed with metastatic ocular melanoma, and our world turned upside down. And I'm sure many of you can relate to that moment. You remember the day you were diagnosed, you remember everything about it. And even all these years later, it brings up a lot of emotion. So I think this is a quote from Keith Flaherty, who I was just texting with this morning. He's an amazing medical oncologist at Mass General Hospital, so just across the way. And he helped me understand that just as scared and alone and isolated as Greg and I felt, the clinicians treating patients with ocular melanoma, this was back in 2006, felt just as isolated. So this is a quote from Keith Flaherty. The ophthalmologist who treated it didn't know the oncologist who treated it or the researchers who studied it. And so as Greg was sitting at Dana-Farber late at night getting his, phase 1 clinical trial juice in his veins, I didn't know what I should do. And some of his doctors and some of my mentors said, you need to organize the field. And I couldn't take that poison in my, blood. I couldn't take that away from Greg. And so I went to work, and we tried to, the advocacy that we were doing for Greg, we tried to take that to the larger community to advocate for everybody. And so it was in 2009 that we had our first scientific meeting. Dr. Kim and I were just talking about that actually here in Boston. For the first time, we brought an interdisciplinary group of physicians and researchers together to meet and talk. And we brought patients into that the next year. And that was really the foundation for what CureOM has grown into. So you can see our mission statement for CureOM, which stands for the Community United for Research and Education of Ocular Melanoma, really mirrors the larger MRF mission, really thinking about the three pillars of research, education, and advocacy. You can see Greg there getting his right eye treated. He had a plaque in Philadelphia. You can see one of our early meetings after founding CureOM under the Melanoma Research Foundation umbrella there. And then you can see a few years after Greg died, our daughter Juliana and I honoring him on Eye Patch Day, which is an awareness day that the patient community has started. So to talk a little bit about where CureOM is now, I often have a slide, it might be in here somewhere, sort of like the general MRF one of like, okay, in those early days when we hadn't met anybody and the ophthalmologist hadn't met the oncologist, no one had met anybody, we have slides of like, and where are we now? And I think this room is a testament to that. Well, we're building community. We haven't done everything we need to do, but we're sitting in community more now. And we have more opportunities to come together. We're raising money for research. We're pushing the field forward. We have a patient registry that we can ask questions of to get some answers. So we haven't done everything we need to do, or we wouldn't be sitting here, but we are making progress. And I think with everyone in this room, we will continue to make the progress we need so that this disease becomes cured or manageable, and we stop having empty chairs at tables where they should be filled. So just to go over a few awareness and early detection campaigns that we have within CureOM, I'm sure you've all seen some of the I Get Dilated information on social media. Here's Lindsay Zubek, whose family worked to fund the grant that Dr. Hawk received. And she unfortunately couldn't be here this weekend, but there you see her picture for Eye Patch Day. I think that was last year or the year before. And then some other materials we've used for I Get Dilated, the I Get Dilated campaign. And so that's a social media campaign that we do in November. Again, please help amplify the messages. If you have any questions or suggestions about it, let us know. For advocacy, the advocacy in ocular has looked a little different than the main MRF. On the right, you see a picture of a group of us who went to the FDA and had the first ever rare disease listening session for uveal melanoma with the FDA, and started to really make some inroads with the team there to help them understand the patient journey and what the needs are, so that when the FDA is working with companies and other stakeholders in the field, they can center that around the patient voice. Some other advocacy, you can see like the big A advocacy in the middle where we have the ocular melanoma patients, and you can see the son of one of our ocular melanoma patients, Mercer, standing right there in front of the Capitol. So that's Hill Day. And then some other advocacy we've done, we worked very closely with the Cancer Genome Atlas Project at the National Institutes of Health to advocate for uveal melanoma to be included as one of their rare cancers in that project, which I think was a real win. We worked very hard on that and very quickly, and some of you in the room were involved with that and even gave tissue to that. And I think that was a very important research foundation to build on, and I think we're building on that now. So just to show that advocacy happens at many, many levels. And so don't ever think that you're not an advocate because you're not at the Hill. Advocacy happens in many ways. And then our research program with CureOM. So we also give out grants, as you have heard, in the OM field specifically. As you heard, Dr. Hawk, who's in this picture, this is in his lab, you will get to visit on Sunday, was a recipient of a grant from us this year. So we're really excited for you to hear more about his research and see it firsthand. Other scientific initiatives, I mentioned the Cancer Genome Atlas Project, which we've been involved with. And then we started the Vision Registry several years ago. That's now grown out to a full platform, and I'll be reviewing that and sharing some data from that with you on Sunday. We hold at least one annual global science meeting a year to help bring all the stakeholders in science and research together. That typically is in the fall in partnership with the Society for Melanoma Research Congress, or SMR. The NCI has been a co-sponsor with us a few years, and we typically have a paper that we publish after that, sort of summarizing what's been discussed at the meeting. And so that meeting this year will be in New Orleans in October. So I always like to, I think this is one of my last slides. This is a quote from Greg at our first International OM Science meeting before CureOM existed. And this, I think is just a poignant quote. And it's interesting because we're actually where he made this quote. So this was Greg's vision. We have a vision. We want a team of experts to focus on ocular melanoma. The more minds we bring together to look at the OM, the better result we might have. The team, no matter what academic halls they walk, approaches they use, research they are pursuing, are willing to collaborate, push the limits, take risks, think outside the box, be aggressive yet safe, be passionate and integrative. Greg was a psychologist and always wanted people to work together, and particularly when he was fighting for his life and there were no treatments, and ocular melanoma was exclusion criteria for any of the melanoma clinical trials. You can understand the context in which he said that. And I think it's still relevant, and I have a feeling that many of you in this room probably really relate to that and maybe feel similarly. So I think this is how we think about research in this space, and I think as a CureOM team, this is how we try to push. We try to challenge and ask questions of researchers, of the community, to try and push the limits. I think that's our job as a patient advocacy organization when we're thinking about how to push the field forward. So I won't belabor these points. We've talked about the research grants. This is Dr. Andrew Applin in the right in Philadelphia, who is also a recipient of a CureOM grant. We have grants at different levels, which is great, starting from medical students all the way up to very established investigators. It's really exciting to see when there are medical students interested in going into ocular melanoma. That means that there's so much going on in the field that, you know, even as a student, people are aware of that. And then we mentioned that Lindsay Zubek and her family worked to raise funding for a Team Science Award, and that we're going to get to hear from the recipients of that award during this meeting. So just to end on, through many years, it was identified that what we really needed was a cross-institutional patient registry. We needed to hear the patient voice. And so we pulled together a 17-person steering committee of all different disciplines, and with patients and caregivers at the center of that, but all different disciplines represented on our steering committee, including Dr. Kim, who's in the room, and others. And after about 5 years, we finally launched Vision in May of 2021. So we have been collecting data for about 2.5 years. We have over 500 patients in Vision right now. And I look forward to talking with you more about that on Sunday, talking about some of the challenges, some of the opportunities, ways to get involved. And Neil and I will co-present. Neil is also a member of the steering committee for Vision, and we'll share some of the data and hopefully have a conversation and get some feedback back from you about Vision as well. So just to end, I think as we go into this weekend, as we've talked about, can be very emotional. There's going to be a lot discussed. Hopefully it's an exciting weekend. I think there's a lot going on in the field right now that can and should give us so much hope. And I think that's what we like to focus on. And we are surrounded this weekend by companies and doctors and researchers who are able to provide that hope for us. They are working so hard on behalf of this community and together with this community so that we will cure this disease. So thank you all for being here. We're so excited to kind of go through this weekend with you and get to know you all better. And I think that's a good place to sort of transition into our starting point is going to be hearing from patients and family members. I think it's a really important kind of anchor for the weekend. So I'm going to hand it over to Miriam, who's going to transition us into that.
All right, well, thank you. We're going to get started. Thank you so much, Sarah, for setting the tone for this weekend's meeting. I just want to make another announcement that in your program, we have all of the bios for all of our speakers. So we're not going to give a full bio before everyone speaks, just because it's in your program, so you can read about each speaker. But I also want to make a special note to say thank you to our planning committee of patients who helped plan this weekend. And you're going to hear from some of them now as I call up John Derek Reese to the podium, Dana Brunt, Neil Corman, Robert Need and Kathy Need, and Ali Dashow. Derek is a former U.S. naval officer and is an ocular melanoma survivor. He lives with his wife of 37 years in Montgomery, Texas. Dana was diagnosed with OM in August of 2017 and treated at Mass Eye and Ear with proton beam. His journey with OM has led him to be interested in mindfulness, resiliency, mental health support, and equitable employment, inclusion, and advocacy for people living with OM and related health and visual issues. And maybe you can raise your hand when I say your name. Neil. Neil is a uveal melanoma survivor and advocate who was diagnosed 3 days prior to Christmas in 2016. He had brachytherapy on his left eye at the start of 2017. Robert has lived in northeastern PA for 60 years. In November 2020, his ophthalmologist found a spot on his eye and immediately set in motion the diagnosis, treatment, and eradication of the ocular melanoma tumor in his right eye. Kathy. Kathy is a dedicated caregiver to her husband, Robert. When her husband was diagnosed with OM during COVID, the inability to attend live meetings and doctor appointments had her very frustrated. She then threw herself into research. The research afforded by the internet allowed her to explore all possibilities and plot a course of treatment for her husband. Ali. Ali is a 28-year-old from New York and was diagnosed with OM on June 1st, 2022. She underwent plaque brachytherapy and is currently NED. Thank you all for being up here. Big round of applause for them. And I have a few questions for them, but I also would like the audience to think of questions that they would like to ask to our patient and caregiver panel. So I'm going to get started with anyone can answer this question, but what do you hope to gain from this weekend?
Hopefully this isn't too loud. I had done back in the fall and then in the winter, like a trek through True North Treks, which is a nonprofit for young adults with cancer. And it was like a weekend long retreat. And I think since then I realized just like the power of having a community and meeting people who have been through similar experiences. So I think for me, just sort of like growing that community, building connections, feeling less isolated and alone. I think for me, that's the biggest thing.
Thanks, Ali. Anyone else want to answer that question? Yeah, Kathy.
I think that for us to gain an understanding of where we're headed and both theory and practice and the clinical trials and things like that, and also to understand that everyone's journey is unique. We share a common bond there, but our journey itself is actually very unique.
For us, it was very insightful the way the medical staff and our referrals came together. You have to look at things with your eyes open, see the possibilities that are put before you, and find out which are the best choices for us. She's good at that.
I would say shared resilience, right? We were talking at our table and we actually found out that we knew a common patient at different camps, but we knew each other. But yeah, so in these groups that we would go and meet other cancer patients and you would say different things, what you've been through and what helped you and stuff like that. And those small group and that sharing, that really is a shared resilience. And that's what I hope to get out of this, more of that.
Shared resilience. Some good words there. Thanks, Derek. Yeah, Neil?
Sort of echoing what others had said, building the community, finding out on medical research, but also, making those connections is extremely important with the other patients, with the many physicians, clinicians, researchers. So, we're putting a face on both sides so they understand our story, and we also understand the powerful work that they're doing to help fight UVL.
Thanks, Neil. So, Dana, I'm going to ask you, what types of supports or resources have you sought out in the past, and what have you found helpful?
Yeah, sure thing. Well, I was diagnosed 2017 and I was 41 at the time. Treated here in Boston, Mount Sinai, MGH. Early on, just searching a lot online for resources and information. The communities and Facebook groups were super helpful. It's also scary when you're kind of consuming that much information. And some of the statistics don't look so great. But the doctors and staff and resources were fantastic here. Also had, I think at the time, a Phone Buddy program that was super helpful. Just kind of my first patient-to-patient peer support. I know that there's different groups that do a similar thing now. What else? I would say I kind of kicked the can down the road on mental health support a little bit. I did meet with a social worker right at the diagnosis, and I think I was just too overwhelmed at the time as you're, just kind of this wave of, information and mortality and everything else. So I didn't seek any additional support for a few years. At one point, I did kind of see a therapist in New Hampshire. We didn't really click. It was more clinical and more about getting a diagnosis for insurance purposes, and we didn't really want to talk about cancer survivorship and kind of those stressors. But then 2 years ago, I did join a cancer resiliency group through MGH, a support group that was around stress management, resiliency training, which I believe was through like Benson Henry, Mind Body Wellness here in Boston, curriculum and everything based on that. That was super supportive. And that kind of transitioned into doing more one-on-one CBT, cognitive behavior therapy, just kind of dealing with not even just a cancer diagnosis, but just kind of all the stressors, vision loss, life stressors, work-life balance, feeling like you're stuck or want to do more. So that helped a lot. Negative automatic thoughts and like different techniques and things that you can help with kind of managing that stress response and kind of triggering relaxation response. So that was super helpful. Still doing that today. Definitely recommend checking out the content either virtually or in person on some of that. And then I guess self-directedly, I also did music therapy. I'm a musician, a mediocre musician from way back in some bands and whatnot, and kind of found that as more a source of kind of processing my own emotions and thoughts, and kind of dove into that. Maybe when I should have been seeking more some other avenues, but that was super helpful in my journey as well. So
Thank you so much. I think that could probably resonate with a lot of people in here, that music can sometimes take us to a different place. So that's really helpful. And you gave a nice segue to our 10:30 a.m. speaker. If anyone is interested in learning more about mind and body skills, you'll go into track 2, mind body skills for managing uncertainty and fear of recurrence with Dr. Daniel Hall. Thank you, Dana. Derek, you're up.
Okay.
Where have you found peer support? What have you found has been the most useful thing about connecting with others?
Well, like I said before, shared resilience and I've done several outdoor cancer events, Epic Experience, and then Real Recovery, which was fly fishing. And in all of those sessions were small groups. And I think the best thing about small groups when you meet with other cancer patients is they get you. And so whatever you say makes sense, right? And if you get emotional, they get emotional. And so it's a really great thing. And I have one group in January and they named their camp "We're Not Crazy," you know. So I think so it was great. So small groups has been where I got a lot of peer support, as well as I do Emmerman Angels, and you probably heard us doing a little video for one of my guys who's doing his ChemTrek today. And you know, that sharing is good peer support. And then finally we do our last Thursday of the month.
Yep.
You know, MRF supports, and several of us are on there together, and we also were going to Boston. So you got to get out and meet other patients and share resilience together. That's where I got my peer support. And I had a great caregiver too.
Yeah, thanks, Derek, and gave a plug for our monthly support group. We actually have two. One is on the first Wednesday of the month during lunchtime, and then the other is in the evening, the fourth Thursday of the month. And last month we had 29 OM patients register for that Thursday meeting. So that is really a good show, a good representation of, you know, people wanting to connect. So Allie, I'm going to turn it to you from the young adult perspective. Can you share a little bit about what it was like to be diagnosed with OM as a young adult and where you seek support?
Yeah, sure. So I was diagnosed June 1st of 2020. It was actually, I think, about 2 weeks after I had just graduated. I got my doctorate in clinical psychology. So it was interesting timing because I felt like I could finally breathe and relax after getting my doctorate, and then all of a sudden was diagnosed. Yeah, I think like being a young adult and being diagnosed with ocular melanoma has been an interesting experience. I think to start, just like one of the unique challenges is obviously if we look at everybody sitting here, I'm probably the only patient I think here under the age of 30. So it's, I think, definitely can be isolating in that way. Obviously getting a cancer diagnosis can be isolating, and then I think like the age piece on top of that has been challenging. I think some other unique challenges that I've experienced, and I think just from talking to other young adults, is, for example, like dating. Like if you're starting to date someone, right? When do you tell them about your diagnosis? How much do you share? When is it too soon or too late, right? And there's no such thing, right? Obviously it's subjective. There's no right or wrong. But I think navigating that had definitely been a challenge for me at one point. And then I think too, just thinking ahead to my life, again, as I said, obviously my late 20s and feeling like my life's just starting. So I think, you know, obviously like that fear of like, okay, I'm in my late 20s, right? Am I going to live to get married, have a family? What is life going to look like? You know, doing injections in my eye every 6 weeks. I'm like, wow, like this is a lot, doing that indefinitely. So there's definitely been, I think, a lot of like unique challenges to being diagnosed as a young adult. And at the same time, I think it's such like a very tight-knit, supportive community in the OM world. So I'm very grateful that, you know, regardless of who I'm talking to or how old they are, I definitely can still like feel that connection and feel that support.
Thanks, Allie. I'm going to go to the end of the table here to Robert and Kathy. And you're a duo, a dynamic duo. So can you share a little bit about your story and how you support one another?
I'd like to say first of all, team, and I don't like to look at myself as the caregiver as much as we are in this together. And I say that we've been very, very fortunate, very blessed with the team of doctors that have come into our lives. And I take it as a lighthouse, okay? Because each one sheds something different to us. And something as simple as I played in a handbell choir, an English handbell choir. The lady who was the director of the handbell choir, when she found out about Bob's diagnosis, she said to me, "Oh, my 7th grade boyfriend." Okay.
Seals our age.
Was what, yeah, she is our age, was or is an ophthalmologist, and you might want to talk to him. Well, not only did we talk to him and made such a connection, but he had studied with Dr. Shields and everyone down in Philly. He still had the connection with them. So it had made it, I mean, great connection. He gave Bob his personal cell phone number. You have any questions, anything about whatever, anytime you want to talk about anything, call me. So, and I also say, I look at where we live and we're about, it's almost 3 hours to Philly. How fortunate we are, because we are that close. We don't have to, I mean, there are people that we meet in the offices and they're flying in from all over the place. And we just have, this little drive and we're pretty close. Now, we do live in a very rural area. We don't have quite connections of groups and things because we're out in
No place
the
like.
promised land, which is actually a town next to our town. That's the name of it. But I just think the fact that we're in it together, and he has these 2 plaques here that he brought, and I'll let you speak on them.
We fight together. We fight everything together. For a long time with our one son, we had problems and we learned to overcome those problems and do the research together and bounce things off together and talk. The people that have come into our lives because of this, not so much patients, because we're very rural. My optometrist, who actually found the cancer, was a student of mine. And he still, I don't like this. And he found the retina specialist. The retina specialist got us right to Will's. Within 3 weeks, I had surgery on the eye. It all fell together so wonderfully. And it's because deep research, a lot of talking back and forth, a lot of questioning of where we're going to go and how we're going to get there, and all the scenarios that play out in your brain or your mind as you walk through that. It's been a journey and we're still on the journey.
And I always try to be positive with Bob. I tried when he first started, I would tell him about the patients that had lived a long time. I didn't tell him about the other ones that I read about. I just wanted to give him the encouragement and the positive to stay on focus and to do. He was in a clinical trial. It was god awful, but
Yeah.
I do believe that part of the good out of that is that he still has some of the benefits of that clinical trial, that he was on it for about 5 months. It was the Sutent and VPA, if any of you've been involved. And yes, he lost a toe out of it, his big toe.
It knocked the poop out of me. It really, really put me
But-
down.
I really think it had some positive effects in the long term, and time will tell.
Time will tell. Off and running, 3.5 years, cancer-free. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both. We're going to turn it over to Neil, and I'm going to ask you a 2-part question. Neil, because we know you've gotten involved with the MRF and the CureOM initiative on both advocacy and research. So I'd like if you would be able to share with us a little bit about that experience, getting involved with advocacy and research, and now education. You're involved in all 3 pillars. But if others are interested in getting involved, what might that look like?
Sure. So, was last year I did my first Hill Day. Sarah had mentioned that earlier. And that really started to leapfrog, taking a bigger role in sort of getting my voice out there and speaking on that regard. And going into Hill Day, I had no idea what to expect. And it was easy. A full day of information, training, of what the initiatives are that we're going to speak to our representatives and senators about in that regard. And so not just the ocular melanoma community, but also working with the cutaneous and mucosal members as well, sort of working together. And I'm from Colorado, so we had the first year I did 5 5 members, and one of the cutaneous patients brought her daughter along as well. And really, you're not meeting with your representatives and senators, you're meeting with the policy director in that area. And they're the ones that really gather the information and give that in that regard. This past year, I did it again. And if anyone's interested, it's usually always during appropriation season, which is early March. And it's Sunday, Monday, and then Tuesday is Hill Day, where you're going up and having those appointments in that regard. And this past year, there's there's always 4 or 5 items that we talk about with members of Congress. And this year there's 4. 2 were on funding. One was NIH funding. The second is funding for a program that's part of the Department of Defense called CDMRP, and I'll talk a little bit more about that here in a second. And then telehealth. So I'm not sure if folks here in the room or also online watching have utilized telehealth, but right now crossing state lines is a temporary sort of ongoing item. So really trying to make that permanent. Coming out of the pandemic, healthcare has changed in that regard, and especially with the rare types of melanoma, telehealth can be extremely important because not all of us are fortunate enough to live in areas where there are physicians and those types of things to help cut down on some of those visits. And then the 4th item was can't think of it right now. It'll come to me in that regard. But and then I mentioned CDMRP. So CDMRP through the Department of Defense is the congressionally directed medical research program. And there is $40 million of funding for melanoma research. And I, as a patient, sat on a panel this past November and actually reviewed proposals that were out there. And the panels have consumer reviewers, which as a patient I fall into. And so you're listening to scientists, review these, and you're in awe of, sort of what they're talking about. And likewise, as a consumer, it's the flip. They're, grateful that we're doing it as well. And it's and if anyone is interested in being part of either of those, definitely reach out to Kim at MRF, and also there's a specific newsletter for advocacy, and I encourage everyone to be part of that as well, just to see some of those items that are out there. This is Melanoma Awareness Month, so we did get a proclamation in Colorado that it is Melanoma Awareness Month. That was signed by the governor. And I know other melanoma patients have done that in other states as well. I think Minnesota, I saw, Texas. And if you follow anything melanoma related through the MRF on social media, I'm sure you've seen those reposts, whether it's on Instagram, LinkedIn, or anything else there, because there's a huge social media campaign right now in that. Then also, as Sarah mentioned earlier, I sort of stepped up and said, hey, I'm interested in how can we make the Vision platform better? And so I'm now on the steering committee with other patients in that regard, providing some of those insights, but also, it's a mix. And so, definitely getting input from, from patients, but also from the researchers that's using that data. So I do encourage also, if you're not registered yet, if you're not one of those 500 people have registered, to definitely take a look at that. And as Sarah said, we'll be talking more about it over the next couple of days.
Thank you, Neil. I'm going to open it up to questions from the audience. Does anyone have a question for the panel? Okay. Here's a microphone.
Hi, I'm Liz, and I'm newly diagnosed in 2022. So as a result of ocular melanoma in my right eye and various surgeries, I've lost a lot of my vision. Thank you all, everyone here so far, because right now my husband and I are here for the first time, and we are absolutely in the overwhelmed stage still. And just finally starting to metaphorically see a light at the end of the tunnel. And I say that metaphorically because through the course of this, I have lost my vision. But I've heard several of you mention a program called Vision, which we're going to talk about on Sunday. And if somebody could just elaborate on what that is all about. And also, I just want to say kudos to the couple of 37 years marriage for being so positive. We are going on our 35th year of marriage, and we'll talk. Thank you.
It's actually 47, but
Oh, 47.
No,
I
but-
misheard. Oh my God,
no,
double,
I don't think he
We
misheard. I
fudged
think he
numbers.
forgot.
triple
No, it's
kudos.
Derek. Derek is 37 years, correct? And Bob and Kathy are 47. Great. Neil, do you want to answer
I'll
this?
speak for Len. Liz and Len applaud you both. Thank you.
Sure, I'll take that, the question. So, before I get into vision, I do want to say this is my fifth time coming to one of these events. And, so if there are questions or anything that either of you have, feel free to reach out to anyone. What I found, with this event, this yearly event, is that everyone is open and willing to talk and answer any questions. So, you're definitely not alone in that regard. So the Vision platform is a mechanism just to collect data and to try to help find trends for ocular melanoma patients in that regard. There have been a couple clusters that are out there. There's one in Auburn that you may have heard about, and then also one in North Carolina, and just try to find some of that historical data or any information so that the researchers can, have some insight and a starting point of, what causes ocular melanoma in that regard. Where, with 2,000 to 2,500 new patients every year in the US, it's a very small population. So anything that we can do in terms of provide information and gather those items there. So some of the questions as you go through the process of, sort of submitting data there is, where have you lived over the years, any other and other elements like that, really adds to that data collection that that Sarah and I are going to talk about on Sunday, and just sort of show some of those data points. But the more that we can contribute some of that information, the more it helps the researchers.
Thank you, Neil. In your folders, you can find the Vision brochure. It looks like this. I'll hold it up. And you can learn more about signing up and what kind of information the platform collects. But we will talk much more about it throughout the weekend, and feel free to come up and ask any questions. Any other questions?
And I just want to throw out there that Vision's acronym, and I don't remember exactly what. So.
Virtual Information System to Improve Outcomes and Networks.
Thank you.
Okay, I have one more question for Derek, and then we're going to play an icebreaker as we go into our break. So Derek, how do you, and anyone can answer this one as well, but Derek can start. How do you manage post-treatment side effects? And how do you manage scanxiety?
Oh, okay.
And what do you do between scans?
Okay. This is a big question. Okay, so how many of you, like when you get up in the morning, you close this eye and look at the bad eye, and you look at this eye and look at the good eye, just to see how your eyes do? Yeah, all of it do it, right? And that's what I do. I go in the bathroom, I go, yeah, not so good today. So I think, you know, on the post plaque or proton, whatever you decided to do, you know, even though if you have Mets or you're waiting for Mets or whatever you want to call it, you know, there's still side effects, right? There's loss of vision. I remember like in the beginning, like everybody would look like this, you know, that eventually straightened out. And then it got really better and it got like to 27. And I was like, whoo, I got this. And then it didn't get so good and it started getting bad. Then we did the shots, right? And then my wife would go and she goes, that's a lot, you know, and they pry your eye open. And so I do that every month. And so then it got better again. And I was like, okay, I got this. This is cool. And then one day it really started hurting. And then it went totally gray. And then the eye pressure, apparently, the doctors know what this does. The fluid rotation in my eye, it quit. And so the pressure went, and then the pain went, right? And so I was telling like, you either fix it or take it out because it really, really hurts. So if your eye starts hurting really bad and you can't see and you get that glaucoma stuff, get in there, because that's going to hurt a lot. But we got that fixed. We found a surgeon that was able to do that. So it's like, woohoo, and got that done. We just did the monthly shots. And then the next thing, just this past month, the vision got worse again. And they go, yeah, I think you probably got some neuropathy to the optic nerve now. I said, okay, what do we do if they go, no, there's not really a treatment. So I tell you all that, right? For the, you know, even after the initial treatment, there's still things that happen. And there was a great presentation a couple of times ago where the doctor explained what all those side effects come from. And I tried to remember, did my doctor tell me all those things might happen? Maybe, I think she did, maybe she didn't, I don't know. But I was talking to a friend of mine, I said, and we were talking about this, and he said, I said, well, you know, even if they had told me and that registered in my head, all these things that we're going through, I still would have said yes, right? All of us would have still said yes. We still want to do the treatment. We still want to keep going. We're not ready to just throw in the towel. So, you know, that's the way I do post-treatment effects. It's just one doctor told me, says, Derek, we just do the next right thing. And so the next right thing is get a shot. The next right thing is to go outside. The next right thing is to go to another scan or whatever. As far as Scanxiety, I think all of us, I think it's very, very easy to go down the rabbit hole or probabilities in the papers, you know, 1A, 1B, 2, you know, big tumor, little tumors. You know, I think it's very normal to be anxious when you go to your scan because we're afraid of metastasis. And I have a friend, he's doing his now, and we made a little video for him because he's getting his Kimtrack this afternoon. Well, he's at the hospital right now. Anyway, I think it's real normal to be Scanxiety. And so what I do for Scanxiety, which used to be bad, but now it's I do the next right thing, and then I go outside. Unless that's what Lisa says. She says, I'm like a kid, you know, it's like if I'm not behaving or I'm not doing right or I'm getting down, she's like, you need to go outside and play. You know, go to Colorado, go to Wyoming, whatever you got to do, let's go. And so that's what we do. And I was having a hard time waiting for another scan because there was a spot and I was thinking this is too soon. And I went to Real Recovery up in Wyoming. We went fishing and they were real about being in the moment. And so Lisa was waiting for me in Salt Lake City. I came back to Salt Lake City and I said, so we're supposed to be in the moment. Let's go to the Yellowstone and Teton. She goes, I don't have any clothes. We'll buy them. And so we did. We took off and we drove up there and had the best time together in Yellowstone, the Tetons. And so, what was I gonna say? So, and this is silly. If you ever watch that show, Virgin River, there's a little guy in there. He's got a life threatening disease. And, but he said something, and I thought that made a lot of sense to me about Scanxiety was if I focus on what could happen or is gonna happen, I forget the joy of what's happening right now. And so that's kind of how I do it. I try to focus on the joy of right now. So there you go.
Thank you, Derek. Living in the moment. All right. Thank you to our panelists for coming up in the beginning of our day and sharing with all of us. A big round of applause to you. We are, please feel free to come up to them at any point throughout the weekend. I'm sure they'd be happy to chat. We are now going to transition into our break before our 10:30 start, which is in 3 minutes, but we're gonna quickly play a game. So if everyone could stand up, and we are going to have two sides of the room. Come to this side of the room on my left if you have attended one of these Eyes on a Cure patient symposia before. And if you have not, you're going to go to that side of the room.
Virtual go this way or that way?
Virtual counts, so you come over here. All right, you're going to have 30 seconds to talk to the people on your side and introduce yourself. Yes, please. I don't know how long 30 seconds is. Okay, I love seeing everyone talk, but we're going to the next question. So sorry. I know everyone's chatting. All right, the next question. Come to this side if you are a patient. Come to this side if you are a caregiver. And go to the back if you don't fit into any of those categories. Patient, caregiver. Don't fit into that category, go in the back and introduce yourselves. We're getting you walking today. Okay, I told you these were quick. I'm so sorry. All right, the next question, everyone. I love the chatter. All right, which part of the USA do you call home? East Coast over here. West Coast over here. Midwest in the back. East Coast. West Coast. Central. You get to decide. You'll go west. East Coast. I'm sorry, I'm making you. And Central in the back. All right, 30 seconds to introduce yourselves. Our East Coast looks a little bigger. Okay. Thank you for playing our icebreaker game. Looks like there are many more conversations to be had this weekend. All right, everyone, we're going to get started with our program. You can go back to your seats. Thank you for playing. All right, we're going to get started, everyone. You can go back to your seats. Grab a coffee, grab a drink. We're going to get started. I did. Everyone was likes to talk. Good. Good. All right, we're going to get started. In this room is going to be track 1 with the sessions on primary ocular melanoma diagnosis and treatment. So if you would like to stay for this session, stay here. If you are going to track 2, mind-body skills for managing uncertainty and fear of recurrence, you're going to head into the Fenway room. Okay. We're getting started with our track 1 and 2. Everyone on the left side of the room, we're going to get started. I promise we have more icebreakers planned for the rest of the day. I promise. I promise. Great to see you. Are you? Okay, great. See you early. Yep. Okay, I'll walk around. Yes, and yeah, will you help maybe people get there? All right, if you are staying in here, we are having track 1, primary ocular melanoma diagnosis and treatment. And then in track 2, in the Fenway room, we have mind-body skills for managing uncertainty and fear of recurrence. So go to the rooms you'd like to be in. And reminder, they are recorded. Yes. Okay, track 1 is primary ocular melanoma diagnosis and treatment, and track 2 is mind-body skills for managing uncertainty and fear of recurrence. So if you need help getting over to the Fenway room, go out this door and make a right. And then we're going to ask Dr. Wu to come up when she is ready. Grab your coffee. What? You want me to? Okay. No, I'm good. Okay, so if you are here for track 1, you're in the right place. If you would like to be in mind and body skills, head over to the other room. I'm going to introduce you. Okay. I promise there will be more icebreakers throughout the day. I promise. That was really fun and great to see everyone mingling. We are going to get started with our first session here on ocular melanoma diagnosis, biopsies, and proton radiation with Dr. Frances Wu. Dr. Wu is a specialist in vitreoretinal surgery and ocular oncology at Massachusetts Eye and Ear. To read more about her, you can find her bio in the program. I'll turn it over to you, Dr. Wu.
Thank you. And thank you to the Melanoma Research Foundation for sponsoring this great event. I think it's really a testament to how wonderful it is as to how engaged everyone was in the icebreaker. So as mentioned, I'll talk about diagnosis, biopsies, and proton irradiation in primary ocular melanoma. So I will be focusing on uveal melanoma, which is a type of melanoma that occurs inside of the eye, and it is the most common primary tumor, even though overall the incidence is still very rare. It's about 5 to 6 in a million. So what is the uvea? It's kind of a strange word, but it consists of the choroid in the back of the eye, as well as the iris and the ciliary body in the front of the eye. So here this kind of shows where each of those tumors can occur. Oftentimes melanomas do arise from pre-existing nevi, the singular is nevus, which is like a benign mole. So the vast majority of uveal melanomas do occur in the choroid, and a minority of them may involve only the iris or the ciliary body. Ciliary body ones in particular can come to attention at later stages because it can be difficult to see being in that particular location. The presentation of uveal melanoma is usually symptomatic. So most patients do have some visual symptoms, most commonly blurred vision, flashing lights, loss of peripheral vision. But it does mean that about a third actually don't have any symptoms at all. And that can be picked up on a routine eye exam. So we talked about earlier how dilated exams can actually help diagnose this. And occasionally there are some patients who receive brain imaging for another reason and may actually be found to have a mass in the eye and then be sent to the ophthalmologist for an exam. The risk factors for uveal melanoma are older age, fair skin color, light iris color, personal or family history of cancer, and in the case of iris melanoma, UV exposure. In the case of ciliary body and choroidal melanomas, the role of UV is less clear because the lens in the eye actually does filter out much of the UV that we're exposed to. The diagnosis of uveal melanoma is usually made clinically, so that means based on our exam and the imaging tests that we do. Here are some of the classic characteristics. So it's usually a mass in the eye that's well-defined, and it can have a dome, mushroom, or diffuse shape. You can see orange pigments, you can see subretinal fluid. These do tend to be larger once they become melanomas compared to benign nevi. There are certain characteristic findings on ultrasound that we'll show some examples of. Documented growth of lesions can also be suspicious for melanoma, and sentinel vessels in the case of ciliary body melanomas can be seen as well. So here are just some photos illustrating what we see when we actually look at the eye. So on the top left, I don't know if there's a cursor. Oh, yes. So there's orange pigment on top of this brown tumor that you see in the eye. And that's one of the features that can make us more suspicious for melanoma rather than a benign nevus. There, in this example to the right of that, there's a ciliochoroidal melanoma. So melanoma that involves both the ciliary body and the choroid. You can actually see this brown mass peeking out from behind the iris when the iris is dilated, and these vessels on the white of the eye actually are indication that there's a ciliary body tumor there. In the bottom left, there's a tumor up here, but there's also a type of retinal detachment called an exudative retinal detachment that can be associated with that, and that sometimes can lead to vision loss that patients may notice. And then, as I mentioned before, many melanomas do arise from pre-existing benign nevi in the eye, and growth of these nevi can indicate transformation into malignant melanoma. So here's an example of one of these that we have photos of growth that is clearly demonstrated over time. And then here's some of the ancillary imaging tests that we use to help make the diagnosis. So on ultrasound, you can see some of these characteristics. Though mushroom shape is not the most common shape of melanomas, it is something that's considered to be classic for choroidal melanoma versus other types of tumors inside the eye. There's also a feature called low internal reflectivity. So it's a measure of how sound waves reflect off of tissues in the eye. Melanomas are classically found to have a low internal reflectivity. As retina specialists, we also do testing with optical coherence tomography. That's a scan through the retina and the choroid. And you can see a tumor here, and there's fluid, these dark spaces next to it, that also can indicate progression to melanoma. And then on the bottom right, fluorescein angiography is a way of assessing the vessels in the retina and the choroid. And tumors tend to have their own circulation, intrinsic circulation, or blood vessels that actually supply the tumor itself. And next, we'll just show some examples of iris melanoma. This is much less common, but iris melanoma can present with distortion of the pupil. You can have high eye pressures. There can be dispersion of pigment from the tumor. The tumor may have blood vessels on its surface that can be seen. Sometimes contact between the tumor and the lens can cause a cataract, and growth of any pre-existing nevus can also be suspicious for melanoma. And then just like with other tumors that involve the ciliary body, sometimes there can be iris and ciliary body combined melanomas, and those can present with sentinel vessels on the white of the eye. So that's all about the diagnosis. We're going to switch gears to talk next about biopsies. Why are they done and how are they done? So as mentioned before, that it's usually not necessary to do a biopsy to help make the diagnosis. We can usually tell based on the clinical characteristics alone that a uveal melanoma is in fact a malignant melanoma, because there just aren't other things that appear in the eye that way. But sometimes when the diagnosis is uncertain, biopsy can be helpful. I will say that in very thin lesions, especially ones that are maybe a millimeter or two, it can be hard to obtain an adequate sample without causing damage to surrounding structures. And there can also be issues with sampling bias, and that there may be an active part of a tumor within a pre-existing nevus. And sometimes if that part isn't sampled, it may give a false negative in terms of making the diagnosis. So there are potential issues with that, but it can be helpful in indeterminate lesions. Probably the most important role of biopsy currently is prognostication. So giving people a sense of their risk of metastasis. As we know, uveal melanoma, while we are very successful at treating it within the eye, metastasis can be a really devastating complication. And so biopsy gives us information that can be used to help determine an individual's risk. So the biopsy material sent for chromosomal or molecular analysis, the most important right now is of which is gene expression profiling, or GEP. It's been shown to be the strongest independent predictor of metastasis. And I'll show you an example of what that report may look like. So when GEP testing is sent, there's a commercially available test through Castle Biosciences, and it categorizes tumors into a class 1A, 1B, or 2 based on the gene expression profile of 15 different genes. And as you can see, the printout at the bottom, it shows that a class 1A has the lowest risk of metastasis, like less than 5% at 5 years, whereas class 2 tumors have about a 70% risk of metastasis at 5 years. So that can be helpful for people in terms of assessing their individual risk and thinking about how to plan for the future. And also in terms of the medical side of things, how frequently to do surveillance. So most people are going to get a baseline scan of the liver to check for metastasis at the time of diagnosis. But as we know, it's pretty rare to have metastasis that early on. We just don't know if cells have escaped from the tumor and may later grow and become detectable on surveillance imaging. So the National Comprehensive Cancer Network does have guidelines in terms of the frequency and duration of surveillance based on risk features. And that's a determination that's made based on GEP as well as size of the tumor. So staging like T1 through T4, as well as other molecular characteristics that can be present if that's sent instead of GEP. So in the lowest risk eyes, patients will get surveillance imaging potentially only every year for about 5 years. Whereas in the highest risk tumors, surveillance imaging could be done every 3 to 6 months for 5 years. And after that, every 6 to 12 months for the next 5 years. These are guidelines. Sometimes it is based on individual determination and personalized to the patient. In terms of how we actually do the biopsy, here are some of the techniques that are commonly used. Fine needle aspiration biopsy is probably the most commonly used, and there's a little schematic on the bottom left that shows these 2 different techniques. The tumor can be accessed either through a transscleral approach, so this is better suited for tumors that are located toward the front of the eye, where the needle is actually inserted through the sclera or the white of the eye to access the tumor and aspirate a small amount of cells. For tumors that are located more toward the back of the eye, a transvitreal approach is used. The needle is inserted in the pars plana, which is a safe space where you can access the vitreous and the tumor in the back of the eye without hitting critical structures like the retina or the lens. The vitreous cutter in the middle is a tool that's familiar to vitreoretinal surgeons. It's used very frequently for all kinds of retina surgeries, but that can also be used to collect a sample of a tumor for biopsy. And then there are various types of forceps, such as the Essen forceps, that can also be used to collect a sample of a tumor. In terms of research into biopsy techniques, there's a lot of interest in ways of more indirectly sampling rather than accessing the tumor itself. Although the risks are generally quite low of doing biopsy, there are still some risks. And so this idea of liquid biopsy or biopsying the aqueous, which is liquid in the front of the eye, vitreous, which is fluid in the back of the eye, or just peripheral blood, which is collecting blood through a vein, are different ways of sampling that could potentially be useful in the future. None of these are, used widespread in clinical care currently, but things that can be looked at in these fluids are circulating tumor DNA, circulating tumor cells, and these techniques could potentially be used for diagnosis as well as surveillance going forward. But this is still an area of active research. And lastly, we'll talk about treatment of uveal melanoma, which you are already fairly familiar with, but the 2 main ways of treatment are radiation therapy or enucleation. The standard of care really is radiation these days, and that's done through brachytherapy, which is placement of a radioactive plaque on the eye, or a form of external beam radiation, the most common of which are proton beam and gamma knife. Enucleation or removal of the eye is not done so commonly these days, but it is used in select cases, usually with a very large tumor or one that's not really appropriate for radiation. Dr. Desai will talk more about plaque brachytherapy and gamma next, so I'll discuss proton beam irradiation, or PBI. So it is a form of external beam radiation that uses protons. The advantage of protons is that they do offer a relatively localized dose distribution because the protons have a steep drop off beyond the field of radiation called the Bragg peak. So the idea is that tissues, the surrounding structures around the tumor will receive a lower dose of radiation, whereas the tumor itself receives the highest dose of radiation. So there's an increased therapeutic ratio of protons compared to conventional X-rays. Our treatment protocol involves localization of the tumor by the placement of small metal rings called tantalum rings, are usually around the borders of the tumor. So in this particular image, there's the tumor there. We sew these little metal rings that they're quite small, just a couple millimeters. They actually go on the white of the eye and help delineate the boundaries of the tumor. And you can see on the model on the right, we use the rings as well as photography and other measurements to help develop a model to plan for radiation. So there's a customized radiation plan for each patient. Here, the tumor is depicted by this kind of red dome, and the rings are placed around the outer borders to help make the radiation dose delivery as accurate as possible. And it really is a multidisciplinary effort with our colleagues in radiation oncology and physics in terms of modeling and developing a plan for each patient. Here are what we call isodose distribution curves, and they show the dose of radiation that's delivered to the tumor as well as to structures around the eye. So with we can have the patient look in different directions to try to decrease the dose of radiation to critical structures for vision, such as the optic nerve and the macula. In terms of how patients experience this, it's a dose of 70 gray or 50 gray of radiation that's delivered in 5 fractions over the course of 5 days. It's just 1 session daily, and the radiation itself is really just a minute of having the beam on. But each patient is fitted with a custom mask and the custom aperture to help deliver the radiation in a personalized way. And here's just a photo of what that looks like, what that treatment actually looks like when patients go in for radiation. So as I alluded to before, there are specific scenarios where protons may be more beneficial or maybe more advantageous. So especially in tumors that are located near the optic disc or the macula, it can deliver a favorable dose distribution to try to limit the amount of radiation to those structures that are important for the vision. There are also tumors that wrap around the optic disc that may be more difficult to treat adequately with plaque brachytherapy because of the anatomy. And in those cases, proton beam, because it's coming from a source that's in front of the eye, can actually deliver radiation specifically to that area, resulting in really excellent local control rates. There's also cases in tumors that are too large for plaque brachytherapy, either in terms of their thickness or their basal diameter, that can be treated with protons, because protons do have a more localized distribution. And so it can limit overall the amount of radiation or limit the volume of the eye that's radiated and allow that to be possible. So just to go over the outcomes that we've had at Mass Eye and Ear in the past, we've treated over 5,000 patients since 1975 with very low local recurrence rates. That means the chance of the tumor coming back or growing again in the eye are very low, or less than 5%. There's no increased risk of metastasis in eyes that receive radiation compared to those that are removed or nucleated, which means that most patients with radiation can have preservation of the eye and retention of some vision, although that degree varies greatly depending on the location and the size of the tumor. And here's just an example of a successfully treated tumor. You can see on the ultrasound that it initially has quite a bit of thickness, but post-radiation, it has shrunk over time to where it's very small. So it's also important for patients to know that tumors don't really go away exactly, in the sense that when we look in the eye, there's still always a scar or a dead tumor that we see. It's not truly normal. It doesn't disappear. But as long as the scar is not growing, changing in any way, we feel assured that the tumor was adequately treated. So that is it. Thank you. And let me know if you have any questions.
Question. My husband has what the ophthalmologist called a freckle in his eye. How common are those?
Those are pretty common. We say that probably 15 to 20 people, sorry, 1 in 15 to 20 people has a type of nevus or freckle in the back of the eye. Most of those do not turn into melanoma, but those are what we watch. Depending on the size or other features, they may be watched either by a retina specialist or by an ocular oncologist for any change over time. Mm-hmm.
You know, being a nurse,
Yeah, absolutely. That is, those are ones that we do monitor over time, and we look for these characteristics and to assess the risk for transformation into melanoma. Yes.
So my medical oncologist, I think, is doing research in the circulating tumor DNA blood biopsies. So I get that done every like 3 months. And from what I've heard, it sounds like there's the potential for it to be able to detect metastatic spread potentially before like an MRI. And so I'm wondering, I guess, just from what you know, like what is, I guess, like the preliminary finding showing in terms of like the circulating tumor DNA biopsy so far?
Yeah, I think that there has been some studies that have shown promise in terms of being able to detect metastasis earlier than they can be really picked up in an MRI. The reason is that by the time a tumor or metastasis shows up on a CT or an MRI, it has to be a certain size because before it has enough, it can be really resolved in terms of something we can see. And then in terms of something we can biopsy, it has to be a certain size as well. So circulating tumor DNA definitely is something that people are excited about. The other thing that it can be useful for is monitoring response to treatment. That's been looked at in KIMMTRAK or tebentafusp, monitoring levels of circulating tumor DNA once treatment has been initiated in terms of determining the response. Thanks.
Doctor, you mentioned the success rate in stated in terms of the tumor not reoccurring. But I think this is a question I don't think we've ever asked. Is there an increased likelihood that there may be a tumor in the other eye? Or is it
That is a
completely
good
unrelated?
question. Yeah, that's a really good question. It's actually quite rare for people to have a tumor in the second eye. I think there are some case reports, but because I think in general it's such a rare cancer, even for people who have pre-existing moles or nevi, it's exceedingly rare for there to be another occurrence.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Maybe naive question. Are the nevi in the eye same as like for cutaneous melanoma? Because I know it's also pretty rare for them to develop into melanoma.
Yeah,
Is there any difference?
That's a good question. Even though melanomas of the skin and the eye do arise from melanocytes of same type of cell, the mutations that actually drive the development of skin versus eye melanoma are quite different. So they're related in a way in that they come from the same cell, but the types of mutations, their biology, and the response to treatment is quite different, which is why a lot of the therapies for cutaneous melanoma have not worked very well for metastatic eye melanoma.
But is there then any difference? Are these tumors different that arise from the nevi in the eye, or are they more similar to the cutaneous melanoma in that sense, or is it still very different?
They're quite different. Yeah, they come from the same type of cell, but the reasons for their development are different. I mean, you may hear about certain genetic mutations that are present in eye melanoma, like GNAQ, GNA11. Those are not the ones that are found in skin melanomas. I mean, there's some of the risk factors are still present, like people who have fair skin are more susceptible to UV exposure and can develop skin melanoma more commonly. And those are similar people who are susceptible to uveal melanoma, although this question of the involvement of UV exposure is more debatable in eye melanoma. Okay, thank you.
Okay, we are going to move over to plaque brachytherapy and gamma knife radiation with Dr. Desai. Dr. Desai is an associate professor of ophthalmology at Tufts Medical Center and the New England Eye Center.
Okay, thank you guys very much.
All right. So from hearing the panel this morning, I sort of felt like you guys are all experts already. So I don't know how much I'm going to teach you, but you guys have been teaching me a lot already. And Francis' talk was perfect, actually, as a segue to talking about these two other ways of treating choroidal melanoma. So when I talk to patients about treatment, I sort of, like to reframe it, because I think in the eye clinic, it's a lot of times we're thinking about vision as like the primary goal. Like, you're having cataract surgery and like, are you going to see far? Are you going to see near? And, when you're changing gears to talk about choroidal melanoma, it's sort of like I have like these three pillars I think about when we're trying to figure out how to take care of the patient. So the first is local tumor control. That's the first thing that I want to accomplish. And so that means the tumor is shrinking, not growing. It's sort of, as Dr. Wu said, it's not going to be gone, but we don't want it to be growing. The second goal is globe salvage, meaning holding on to your eyeball. The standard of care before all this radiation existed was just to remove the eye completely. And so the second thing we would like to do is have you hold on to your eye and not have to remove it. And then the final goal, final pillar is vision preservation. And so, not that that's not important, but it's sort of the third thing in my list of, what I'm trying to do first. So first local tumor control, then globe salvage, then vision preservation. So where I work at Tufts Medical Center, I do two methods of treatment. The first I'm going to talk about is called plaque brachytherapy, which it sounds like a lot of you have experience with. So what a plaque is it's this, the size varies, but it's somewhere between like a nickel, quarter, $50 sized golden circle. And then on the underside of it are radioactive seeds that can be from iodine, ruthenium, palladium, whatever your source material will be. And it emits 50 to 80 gray of radiation. And then you can use that to locally treat a melanoma. And so this is kind of exactly what it looks like. It's golden on one side, and then the radioactive seeds are on the other. And then there are these islets that are used to suture the plaque in place. So in a plaque brachytherapy treatment, what happens is I'll first bring the patient to the operating room. I'll move the skin of the eye out of the way temporarily. And then I use a light source outside or inside the eye to show where the tumor is. And then I outline it with a marking pen. And then I take the plaque and I sew that onto the backside of the tumor so that it can emit the radiation and directly treat the tumor. Who can get plaque brachytherapy? I mean, you can do them for pretty much all tumors, but there are some limitations. The location of the tumor, it's a little better for tumors that are not abutting or adjacent to the optic nerve. And the problem with those tumors is that it's very difficult to dissect back to that part of the eye and get the plaque close enough to the optic nerve that you're adequately treating the tumor. And so the success rate of local control decreases when you have a tumor that's abutting the optic nerve. So there are these, they're called notched plaques that are created. And so basically you dissect back and you sort of slide this around the optic nerve. And that's a way that you can kind of get there. But it's never really, the radiation is never really able to kind of touch right where the optic nerve is. So sometimes, you have to do a notched plaque, but that's one reason where I may not. That plaques can work for tumors that are up to 10 millimeters in size. Beyond that, the radiation is too hot. You can cause other issues. So that's the size limitation. And then the base diameter of the tumor can be up to 20 millimeters. And that's because the plaques themselves come in a maximal size of 22 millimeters. And so you want to have a little bit of wiggle room on the edge so that you can cover the tumor without worrying that you're not reaching everything. So in plaque brachytherapy, the biopsy that was mentioned previously can be done at the same time. So you can go ahead and take a fine needle biopsy or whatever way you want to do at the time that you're placing the plaque. It takes about 2.5 to 3 weeks to create the plaque because they are designed individually for each person. I work with a team of in medical physics where I am, and they help me to create the plaque and determine the appropriate radiation dose. And the patient is given general anesthesia for the procedure. So once the plaque is placed, it remains on for 3 to 5 days, depending on how long the radiation is needed to treat that size of melanoma. While the plaque is in place, the patient is on radioactive isolation, but they go home. That basically just means that they wear a lead patch at all times. don't have to sleep in a separate room, don't have to avoid particular people. We give them a patch that looks exactly like this, except it's lined with lead on the inside, so that when you're hanging out, you just wear that eye patch, and then the radiation is not emitted. And we sort of check everyone before they leave, and with a Geiger counter kind of held above them to make sure that they're not emitting too much radiation when they have the plaque in place. So after the plaque therapy, the tumor can shrink up to 40%, but as mentioned before, as long as it's not growing, it's considered inactive. And of course, the patient's monitored for long-term recurrence. So in terms of efficacy, we have a similar efficacy at Tufts, but I sort of looked at broader studies to see, and it's quite variable when you look at the papers. This is a meta-analysis and sort of shows an efficacy of from 50% to 100%. And so, at Tufts Medical Center, it's also similar. We tell patients about a 5% rate of recurrence with plaque brachytherapy, but there is a lot of variability out there, just to sort of highlight that. And then the second sort of pillar of the goals here is about globe salvage. So the patient getting to hold on to the eye. And so this is another retrospective study that showed that 85% of eyes were salvaged. And the reason for loss of the eye long-term were to multiple forms of glaucoma, basically radiation damage to the eye causing glaucoma, and then some from lack of complete tumor control. So limitations, when I'm talking with patients, it's 2 visits to the operating room with general anesthesia for the plaque placement and then removal. Sometimes I have to move the muscles of the eye to get the plaque in exactly the right place, and that can result in double vision, which usually resolves. There can be some dry eye and some redness, and then long-term radiation retinopathy and glaucoma. So it is sort of like an ongoing process of not only controlling the tumor at the time, but then dealing with the secondary effects of having all that radiation damage. And the second type of treatment that's out there that I have access to is called Gamma Knife. So this is stereotactic surgery that uses thin radiation beams to treat the melanoma. So again, I work at the team in radiation oncology at Tufts Medical Center that helped me to administer Gamma Knife. So an MRI is used for planning purposes. A block is administered, a numbing block to the eye to hold it perfectly still. The patient is placed in a head frame by neurosurgery. Gamma Knife is performed and the patient goes home the same day. So it's a 1-day procedure, which is sort of the big benefit here. These are just some images that show what the head frame looks like, which you saw before, and then kind of how the gamma beams are aimed at the particular area of concern. This is showing how the MRI is used to sort of mark out the areas where particular doses of the radiation will be administered, always making sure to have like an external rim that's sort of protective, so beyond the tumor margin itself. So Gamma Knife benefits, you avoid general anesthesia. It's a 1-day treatment. I like to use it for tumors that are abutting the optic nerve because that has a higher success rate than the notched plaques. I can treat tumors that are larger than 10 millimeters in height, and I can treat tumors that are larger than 20 millimeters in basal diameter. So those are kind of the plus sides. The limitations for Gamma Knife, it's a little harder for those gamma rays to treat tumors in the very front of the eye, like iris and ciliary body melanomas. And then, it's a dose of radiation that's going through the front part of the eye. So there can be issues with cataract, lid changes, and in the lashes and dry eye. And then overall, if you look at the clinical trials on this, there's increased risk of all the secondary effects from the radiation. So exudative retinal detachments, neovascular glaucoma, radiation retinopathy. And so, a lot of patients can end up with some radiation damage over time. Again, a good local efficacy control rate, somewhere between 91 and 95% in the papers. The eye preservation was a little bit lower due to side effects. And then the likelihood of local recurrence is most correlative with how large the initial tumor was, so what stage it was at the beginning. I have both of these modalities available where I am. And so most of the time I get the question from the patient, well, like, what should I do? And, I tried to find some things that compared, but, as a patient mentioned earlier today on the panel, it's like each person is individual. And so you really have to come up with a plan that works exactly for them. And so it's tough even in these papers for them to compare the different modalities, because in general, much larger tumors are treated with Gamma Knife because they're not eligible for plaque. And so, this paper sort of showed that the larger tumors were treated. There was a local control, a little bit more with plaque, but then a little bit more of secondary glaucoma. So it's a little tough because, you know, you can't really compare when you have each person has an individual tumor and then the sample size is small. So how do I decide? I luckily work with a team between the medical physics team, radiation oncology, and myself. And so I come up with an individualized plan for each person based on their tumor size, risk factors, their personal preference, and also their health. That's all I was going to say. Does anyone have any questions? See, I told you, you guys already knew everything, right? Yeah. So there's different types of retinal detachments, and an exudative retinal detachment is a type that's due to inflammation, tumor, other causes. And then there's rhegmatogenous retinal detachments, which are due to a hole or a tear in the retina. So you oftentimes uveal melanoma will produce a secondary retinal detachment that's associated with it. And so that's like, it's kind of distinguishing the two different types.
I guess I was also intrigued that the second thing that was globe preservation. Is that what you said?
Yes, yes, yeah, yeah.
So it's good to keep the eye even if it doesn't see very much.
You know, no. I mean, if it doesn't see it, if the patient doesn't see it all out of the eye and the eye is painful, then no, there's really no reason to hold on to it. But I think that, you know, when the eye's out of your body, you're definitely not seeing out of it. So I think the idea is that even if the vision is not kept completely because of all the radiation that's needed, whatever we can hold on to is better. And then I also think that it's very emotional to lose an eye completely, you know. And many people, you know, have to go through that. Sometimes the tumor is just too far gone, or for many other reasons, you know, end stage eye diseases that can happen. But I think that's also, you know, just a challenging thing to go through. And so that's the other reason too, is just because it's hard to go through that process. So if you can hold on to the eye and it's comfortable and you can see something out of it, I think that's, you know, we'd like to hold on to it if we can. But you're right. If an eye is painful and not seeing it all, then, you know, there's no really reason to.
Yeah, I want to keep mine, even though it's
Right, right.
don't
We
work
gotta
very well.
keep our eyeballs, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, even when they told me the optic nerve was pooping out, I was sad, you know. It's like,
Yeah.
cool.
All right. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you so much. I'm just going to make an announcement that in this room, we are going to now be transitioning to post-primary treatment care. And in track 2, we will be having a session on talking with loved ones about your diagnosis and care. So now is the time to either stay or go. Won't be offended either way. Just want to let you know about all of your options. Okay. We are going to introduce Dr. Kim. Dr. Kim, thank you for being here. Dr. Ivana Kim is an associate professor of ophthalmology at Harvard Medical School and serves as director of the Ocular Melanoma Center and director of retina clinical research at Massachusetts Eye and Ear. Thank you.
Great, thanks. It's great to be here and great to have the opportunity to speak to you all in this forum. So to me, post-primary treatment care is really what can you expect after you've had the radiation for uveal melanoma? As you've all mentioned this morning, getting the diagnosis, getting through the primary treatment, that's a huge hurdle. And like once you've gone through that, then you start to realize there's this, many years ahead of me of living with basically the consequences of having this pretty high dose of radiation to your eye. And even though your physicians are telling you, it's going to affect your vision, it's hard to understand at the time what that really means and how much vision you might lose and what you'll have to do to kind of hang on to as much vision as you can. So I just kind of want to obviously we can't get into like all the nitty gritty details in this time, but just kind of give you an overview of what to expect after your eye's been radiated. So after radiation, you and your ocular oncologist are going to be friends for life because you basically are going to have regular visits to monitor how the eye tumor is doing to ensure that there's local tumor control. So a typical follow-up schedule after proton radiation for us is we see you at 6 weeks after the radiation is complete, just to make sure your eye's healing well from the surgery, from the biopsy. Sometimes you get a little bit of a lid burn from the proton radiation. So that's just a check-in. We don't measure the tumor. We don't do anything. We're just making sure your eye's recovered from all the procedures. The first time we measure the tumor is about 6 months after the radiation. That's given enough time for inflammation to settle down and for us to see, the first very early signs of regression. And as you've heard many times this morning, we don't really expect the tumor to shrink dramatically as long as it's about the same or maybe a little bit thinner. That's on track. That's what we typically like to see. And then typically we're checking on how the tumor's doing every 6 months for the first 5 years. And then after 5 years, if everything's looking good, we spread out the visits to annually. But a lot of people say, does this ever end? And, honestly, if you're doing well, probably not. So, Dr. Wu and I are seeing a lot of Dr. Grigudis's earliest patients now. It's like the 50-year anniversary of the first proton treatment. And we're still, seeing some of his patients who were treated 40 years ago. So, and what do you expect at those visits? So at a checkup visit, you'll typically have an ultrasound to measure the thickness of the tumor. We take photos to monitor the margins of the tumor. That's a good way even before detecting increase in thickness on ultrasound to see whether there's something called like a marginal recurrence. Is there one border of the tumor that seems to be enlarging or growing or thickening? And these days, optical coherence tomography or OCT or a scan of the macula is an essential part of the visit also because we can detect the earliest signs of radiation damage to the retina by OCT. We'll see changes on OCT many times even before it starts to affect your vision. So a lot of testing at each visit. And then, as Dr. Desai said, we want to make sure the tumor's under control, but we also want to do our best to make sure that you're keeping as much vision as possible. And so we're looking out for signs of radiation retinopathy, which is damage to the retinal blood vessels from radiation, damage to the optic nerve, retinal detachment, as we discussed, leakage of fluid from the tumor that separates the retina from the wall of the eye. And cataract is a common complication of radiation, and patients can undergo cataract surgery, but in any eye that's had radiation, there are special considerations. So I'm just going to go over a few of those things. Some of this data is from an older series where we looked at about 2,000 patients treated. Now we're up to about 5,000 patients treated with proton radiation. But this is data from that earlier series. So what we see after proton radiation is very similar with plaque brachytherapy and other forms of radiation, is that most tumors start to regress within 6 months of radiation, which is why we do the first post-treatment ultrasound at about that point. They continue to regress through approximately 2 years. After 2 years, most tumors have kind of shrunk as much as they're going to shrink, and they kind of stabilize, and what you're left with is a scar. And as you've heard, the tumor will never disappear. We'll always see where it is, but the goal is that it's not growing. So here are some examples. A very large tumor that encompassed the optic nerve. This is one of those cases that would be really difficult to treat with plaque brachytherapy, but had a good result with proton radiation. Here's another patient with a very large tumor here and a retinal detachment to begin with. The retina suffered because you had a retinal detachment that got worse after treatment and then got better on its own, but the tumor is regressed into a scar. Here's another tumor near the optic nerve before treatment and flattened down significantly after treatment. And here's, a smaller tumor outside the macula. Hopefully the radiation border is just outside the center. So this patient hopefully should have a fairly good prognosis even over time. So what about local recurrence? You've heard that 5% rate. That's consistent across most studies. It's about, in this study, was 3% local recurrence at 5 years, and then increased slowly to just under 5% at 15 years. So, it's not really like other cancers where you hit a 5-year mark and all of a sudden everything's fine. Nothing bad is going to happen. You don't have to keep doing your checkups. There's still, a lower but reasonable rate of things happening down the road. So it's important to keep the follow-ups going. So what happens if there's a local recurrence? Many times it can be treated again with radiation. For kind of the biggest tumors and eyes that don't have a lot of vision potential, often we do recommend enucleation. The important thing is that if the tumor does recur in the eye, then you do have to be extra vigilant about checking for metastasis, because we do think that there's something about tumors that recur in the eye that are a sign that they may be more aggressive. And so there is a higher risk for metastasis if the tumor grows back in the eye. So kind of switching over to vision, it was mentioned many times that your vision prognosis really depends on the size of the tumor and the location of the tumor in the eye. So from our data, if you look at tumors that are less than 5 millimeters when they're first diagnosed, and they're not close to the optic nerve and not close to the center of the retina, then the probability of maintaining good vision, in this case, vision better than 2200, which is kind of a low bar, granted, but maintaining at least that vision is really high. If it gets close to both the optic nerve and the fovea, then there's a really high chance that damage to those structures will result in significant vision loss. If the tumor height is thicker than 5 millimeters, then the probability of losing vision goes way up. And that's just because you have to radiate a larger volume of the eye with a bigger tumor, and so there's more collateral damage to other structures in the eye. So other than location and size of the tumor, there are some other risk factors for losing vision, and those include diabetes. It's essentially because radiation damage is very similar to the type of damage that diabetes does to the tiniest blood vessels in the body. You've heard of diabetic retinopathy. Radiation retinopathy is very, very similar to diabetic retinopathy. So if you have both those conditions in your eye, you have kind of 2 hits on the retinal circulation, and so you have a higher chance of having complications. The worse the vision is when you're diagnosed, obviously the harder it is to retain good vision. And then complications, like we discussed, retinal detachment, also increase the probability of not having great vision after treatment. So diving a little bit further into radiation retinopathy, as I mentioned, it's damage to the smallest blood vessels in the retina, which actually doesn't occur right away. It occurs months to years after exposure to radiation. So the reason why radiation works is that it damages the DNA in cells, and when those cells try to replicate and divide, that's when they realize that there's something wrong, and then they die off. So radiation selectively damages rapidly dividing cells, such as cancers. But in the retina, the next most rapidly dividing cell is actually the cells that line the blood vessels, or what we call the vascular endothelial cells. So then that's the next site of damage, other than the tumor that we see is damage to the retinal circulations. And it's estimated that the retina can probably tolerate approximately 30 gray of radiation at tiny fractions, 2 gray per fraction. We're giving 70 to 50 gray in 5 fractions, so pretty large fractions, pretty high doses. So it's almost inevitable that everybody's going to have some degree of retinopathy. It just depends on which structures are damaged. And you don't see this right away. Many people actually sometimes have a little bit of improvement in vision right after radiation treatment because fluid that had been leaking out of the tumor or other things goes away after radiation. But then about 2 to 3 years after radiation is when the real peak incidence of radiation retinopathy sets in, and you start possibly noticing vision changes. It affects about 40 to 60% of patients who have a choroidal melanoma near the macula. So that's not 100%. It means that there are some people whose eyes and whose optic nerves and whose retinas seem somewhat resistant to radiation damage. Many years ago, we tried to do a genetic study trying to figure out like why some people retained 20/20 vision, even though their optic nerve like got 70 gray of radiation. And I think we didn't have enough numbers, but we couldn't really sort that out. But, you know, there's something there that we don't understand. So it's not a guarantee that if you have radiation, you're definitely going to go blind from radiation retinopathy. I mean, there's a high chance, but there are these kind of really outlier patients that retain good vision for a long time. So what happens when you start to have damage from radiation to the retina? You could get swelling in the macula. The macula is the very center of the retina that's responsible for your sharpest vision. Doctors call it macular edema. You can have damage to the optic nerve that results from damage to the tiny capillaries feeding the nerve. We call it radiation optic neuropathy. And you can have growth of abnormal blood vessels. The reason, and this is something that we also see in diabetes, large areas of the retina where the circulation is damaged, the retina sends off signals. The signal, one of the major signals is called vascular endothelial growth factor, which will be relevant when I talk about treatments for this. And that causes abnormal blood vessel growth. Abnormal blood vessels can grow on the retina, on the optic nerve, in the front of the eye, in the angle, and that's what we call neovascular glaucoma, is abnormal blood vessels growing in the drainage system of the eye and causing high eye pressure. And that's really related to the retina not getting enough oxygen for the most part. So what do we do about that? You know, until about 15, 20 years ago, we could do some laser and that was about it. But with the advent of anti-VEGF therapy, which really was developed here in Boston by multiple teams at Mass Eye and Ear and the Joslin Diabetes Institute, this really changed how we manage almost every single retinal condition and radiation retinopathy as well. So there are many anti-VEGF drugs that we use to inject in the eye to control complications of radiation. Sometimes we also utilize steroids, and sometimes we use laser to try to control the abnormal growth of blood vessels as well. So most people will be getting some sort of anti-VEGF medication for treatment of radiation retinopathy. These are just, I mean, the number of drugs we have in this arena has just been kind of exploding. At first, most people will likely be offered Avastin at first because unfortunately, again, a consequence of having a very rare disease is that there's no trials of any of these medications for radiation retinopathy. So it's hard to get insurance coverage for some of the more expensive medications. So a lot of times we're starting with Avastin because it's by far the cheapest. If Avastin doesn't work, you may be offered other drugs, Eylea, Lucentis. The newest one is called Vabysmo, which blocks VEGF plus another factor that causes leakage from blood vessels. And just recently, there's like a very high dose Eylea out there. So there's a whole armamentarium of drugs that can be injected in the eye to try to control the swelling. So here's an example of an eye that was treated with a melanoma really close to the center of the retina. Here is an OCT. So the OCT shows this mound where there's usually a dip those little cysts are the fluid buildup from leakage from the damaged capillaries. And this happened right on track 2 years after proton radiation, and the vision dropped to about 21-25. We started with Avastin. After 2 injections of Avastin, there's really not much change. The vision is getting a little bit worse. Then we moved to steroids because sometimes some people feel that, there's not just VEGF contributing to this, but other inflammatory factors, and steroids kind of target a multitude of inflammatory factors. So we tried steroids, and maybe we got a little bit better, but we're still kind of stable. And unfortunately, this is kind of the typical course when we catch swelling from radiation a little bit late, which is at this stage when there's pretty severe swelling and vision decline. So here's a different example. Same thing. About a year after proton radiation, the swelling here is actually almost as bad as the other case, but the vision's not quite as bad. 20/60, given Avastin twice, not a whole lot of change. In this case, we decided to change to Eylea or aflibercept and had a significantly better response. Like, this is what a normal macular, a normal fovea is supposed to look like. And then keeping up the Eylea or aflibercept in this case about every 10 weeks. 3 years later, the vision is still 20/30. So everybody's a little bit different depending on how bad the vision is when we first catch these complications, I think has a big role in how well we can keep the vision. So in treating these, it's not like macular degeneration or diabetes. We don't often improve people's vision. We're just trying to kind of keep it from getting worse. So here, the great thing about the eyes, we have all these like imaging modalities that can tell us kind of exactly what's going on. So here's a special kind of OCT called an OCTA that shows us, like, see all these tiny little capillaries that supply the center of the retina. So this top panel is a patient who was radiated with proton beam in Switzerland, who got regular anti-VEGF treatments, and the capillaries really look pretty normal over time. The bottom panel is an OCTA of a patient who was radiated but did not get regular anti-VEGF injections. And you can see that it's not just the swelling, it's kind of the blockage and destruction of the capillaries in the center of the retina that lead to vision loss. So this is like a really kind of dramatic example of what sometimes we can do with these regular injections. So even though they're not fun to have regularly, I think it's probably most people would choose to have injections rather than lose vision. And that's kind of what we have now. So like I said, we noticed that if you start late, we can stabilize things, but we can't really improve things in most situations. So a number of years ago, we did a small study that said, what happens if we start these treatments before there's any signs of damage? Because we know who's going to get the damage, the people whose tumors are close to the center of the retina, the fovea, and close to the optic nerve. So we did a pilot study using Lucentis because Genentech sponsored it and gave us the drug. And we started giving patients Lucentis every 2 months for 2 years, starting at the time of the tumor localization surgery, in selected patients that we knew were high risk for losing vision from radiation complications. And after 2 years, what we saw was pretty encouraging, is that the patients who got the Lucentis every 2 months for 2 years, at 24 months, almost 90%, so 88% of them still had 20/40 vision or better at the end of 2 years, compared to less than 50% of historical controls. And 100% of them had 2200 or better. And only about 20% of them lost 3 lines of vision or better, compared to, about 50% in the group that did not have the treatment. And that was kind of some preliminary data. These are some examples. You can see patients with tumors really close to the center of the retina and the optic nerve who maintained really excellent vision over at least 2 years. The experience from the Wills group is very similar. They use Avastin or bevacizumab. They used it every 4 months, and it was non-selected. It was basically everybody who got plaque at Wills was offered Avastin every 4 months for a certain period of time. And so their data is kind of a more heterogeneous group, but at the end of 4 years, the people who got the Avastin had much better median vision than those who didn't. So based on kind of preliminary studies and our overall clinical experience, we're really encouraged to see that the biggest collaborative retina clinical trials network called the DRCR actually decided to launch a huge study, 600 patients, to try to prove that treating radiation retinopathy preventatively actually results in better vision outcomes. So this study just started. I think they've enrolled 10 patients so far. I think they opened last month. And they're going to look at the newest drug, Vabysmo, versus a steroid implant versus observation, and see if actually, treating patients before they develop signs of retinopathy will result in better vision outcomes. But this is, really encouraging that the greater retina community is actually interested in looking at treatments for patients who've received radiation. So I just want to briefly go over something that we've touched on earlier. So that's kind of radiation retinopathy and what we can do about that. We mentioned retinal detachment. So unfortunately, this is something that probably affects our younger patients more than older patients. Here's a 37-year-old who presented with flashes and flickering in her vision for over a year. And then she was finally diagnosed. She had a fairly large melanoma, a pretty good what we call exudative retinal detachment, a collection of fluid underneath the retina that was seeping from the tumor. So she had proton radiation. And just 6 months after proton radiation, this is what happened to her eye. So this whole shadow here is the retina. It was severely detached when you didn't even have to put on your headlamp to see the retina. You could just look through the pupil and see the retina right behind the lens. When you have this severe and this is related to inflammation from the tumor dying, and for whatever reason, we think younger people can have more severe inflammation, which is one of the reasons why it might affect younger people more. No medical treatment really is going to fix this. So this patient went on to have surgery, but Dr. Harbour, who was the developer of the gene expression profiling, the Castle test, looked at retinal detachment in uveal melanoma in a paper published in 2002. He reported that it was present in about half of patients prior to treatment, but the majority of retinal detachments resolved on their own after radiation. But about 10% of people have persistent or worsening retinal detachment, and that was the case with this patient. So what can we do about it? Again, we can try anti-VEGF injections. They prevent the growth of abnormal blood vessels and glaucoma related to persistent retinal detachment, but they don't usually make the detachment go away. We can try steroid injections. Again, sometimes they kind of stabilize the detachment and perhaps prevent it, secondary complications like the growth of abnormal blood vessels. And there have been isolated reports of maybe steroids helping the detachments resolve a little bit faster, but it's still not totally consistent. And then in the most severe cases, we do have to do surgery. So that patient, we did a standard vitrectomy surgery, the way we repair retinal detachments that are related to tears in the retina. And then after a long period of recovery, she did regain vision to 20/70. We'll see how long that lasts, but it's an ongoing battle in terms of, fighting complications from the treatment. And then the last thing I want to touch on is in patients whose lens receive a significant dose of radiation, you can develop cataract sooner rather than later. And cataract surgery is the most common surgery done, in the US of all surgeries. And it can be done in patients who have ocular melanoma and have had radiation, except it's important to know that your eye that's had radiation is not like the the typical cataract patient's eye. And so your surgeon needs to know that there's going to be much more inflammation after cataract surgery in an eye that's had radiation. At Mass Eye and Ear, we recommend that our surgeons do a steroid injection around the eye at the time of surgery to prevent that. Otherwise, there can be scarring around the lens implant and other problems that relate to poor outcomes after cataract surgery. And of course, the vision improvement that a patient with melanoma gets after cataract surgery is really going to depend on the health of the underlying retina and the optic nerve. So it's not going to be as, a miracle of a surgery as it may be for other people, but it can certainly help. But it's important that the cataract surgeon understands that this is an eye with radiation that needs kind of special care. So I guess to recap, I just want to restate that regular monitoring of the eye is necessary pretty much indefinitely after radiation. We want to continue to confirm that there's local control of the tumor and that we address any vision-threatening complications as soon as possible. And there's more and more we can do with that. So like I said, you and your ocular oncologist are going to be friends for life after the diagnosis. But thanks for your attention. And I'll take any questions. Yes. Mhm.
Hello. Okay, thank you. Okay, so we have a few online questions for you. Can you discuss proton beam versus
What test is?
versus plaque?
So I think the primary message is that they're equivalent in terms of local tumor control. So I think that patients don't have to be burdened as to, am I making the right decision? Because they're equivalent in terms of how well they control the tumor. I think where proton may have an advantage are for those situations that Dr. Desai pointed out, that plaques have a slightly higher risk of recurrence, or that so around the optic nerve, tumors that are too big for plaque, those greater than 10 millimeters, those wider than 20 millimeters, because the advantage of protons is that you get the same dose of radiation throughout the tumor, like from this wall of the eye, the sclera, all the way to the apex of the tumor. You get the same dose all the way across, and the beam can be fit to match any size tumor. So it's really the cases that because of the mechanics of plaque that are difficult to treat are kind of more suitable for protons.
Another question was, how much resolution of exudative retinal detachment can a patient expect over time?
Yeah, so in Dr. Harbor's study, 83% resolved completely, and it took almost a year for many of them to resolve. So it's not going to happen right away, but the majority of them do eventually totally go away.
And the last online question was, is going colorblind a symptom of radiation retinopathy?
Yeah, so if your optic nerve is damaged, then color blindness is a consequence of that. If your macula is unhealthy, you also have trouble seeing colors because the macula has the highest density of color sensing photoreceptors. So if the photoreceptors in the macula start becoming damaged and dying off, then people are less able to perceive color.
Thank you. One more question. If survival is estimated to 5 years for GEP, what do you do after that point?
Yeah, maybe I will leave that to Dr. Sullivan, but I think studies like the one ongoing now, like the collaborative ocular oncology study, are going to be following out patients much longer term. I think before we had GEP and we're looking at survival, we did notice that the risk of metastasis, so that's really risk of metastasis up to 5 years, that the risk of metastasis from ocular melanoma in general peaks at 3 to 5 years. And then it goes way down. And then there's another little hump of people who develop metastasis about 8 to 10 years. And there's some correlation between kind of the intermediate risk genetic profiles and those people who develop late metastases, and maybe some correlation between certain mutations found in the tumor and those who develop later metastases. We're still kind of fleshing that all out. So we just need to kind of have longer term studies correlating the information that we now are able to get from biopsies with kind of longer term outcomes.
Any last questions in the room?
Hi, thank you for your presentation. I remember hearing early on, and I'm just in this for 20 months so far. So my eye is still relatively inflamed. But I remember, and I had the plaque therapy, the tumor is dead. And my understanding is it necrotizes. And I thought I read or heard somewhere that there is a procedure to laserly remove the necrosis, which would in effect vacuum the tumor away to prevent recurrence. Is that something that I'm dreaming up or just hopeful for, or
No,
was there no success rate?
no, there is a certain percentage of people, and it's quite, I think people in Europe, people do it, I think, more commonly than people in the States, but there's this concept of what is known as toxic tumor syndrome. So if you have a relatively big tumor and it's damaged from the radiation and its blood supply is damaged from the radiation, then as it starts to die, it kind of like gives off all sorts of inflammatory factors, and that causes inflammation and detachment and all sorts of complications in the eye. So there are people who consider actually surgically going in and removing the tumor with vitrectomy techniques, basically not a laser, but these needle-like instruments that we use to do vitreoretinal surgery, going in and actually removing the tumor, cutting it up and sucking out the cells of the tumor. And then filling the eye with silicone oil to kind of keep the retina in place and doing all of that. I think what the overall impression of the results of that is that people are in general maybe slightly more likely to be able to keep the eye and have the eye be more comfortable. It doesn't really restore a lot of vision in most cases. And there are very, very rare reports of significant complications from that surgery. So, it's not to be taken lightly. And I think in our experience, when eyes are that sick and they don't see well, actually people just in general overall feel much more comfortable just having the eye removed. A lot of people have been in that situation and finally are able to come to grips with, I need to have my eye removed, and actually do it. They uniformly say they wish they had done it sooner, because then, you don't have these frequent visits. You're not on eye drops to control eye pressure, inflammation, this, that. It can be like a huge relief just to have, be rid of that kind of chronic dull pain that people at some point don't realize that they've been living with. So, that's kind of the decision making as to whether you do that kind of really aggressive intraocular surgery, or, do you just, remove the eye.
So it does still exist. It's just a matter of me doing more research to see if it's for me and if I want to bite the bullet.
Mhm.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I just have two hopefully quick questions. One is that I read this in one study, but then heard that it might not be true, or that for tumors that shrink very quickly after plaque, they saw like an increase in risk in METs for those people.
Mhm.
Is that true? I don't know how large that
Yeah,
study was.
there is, before we had all the kind of gene expression profiling and other things that more accurately predicted risk of metastases, that was considered to be one potential risk factor is if the tumor regressed really quickly. And that had to do with, rapidly a tumor that had like a high, what we call mitotic index, or like rapidly dividing cells, might be considered to be more aggressive. But those are the cells that respond better to radiation because they're dividing more rapidly. But then people have done studies trying to correlate like the GEP class, like class 2 versus class 1, and how they regress. And there's really no consistent correlation. Like the class 2 tumors don't regress faster necessarily than the class 1 tumors. So I don't think that that's really something reliable that we can go on. Like I wouldn't, tell a patient to be too worried if like all of a sudden their tumor was half the size at like 6 months. That's not necessarily a bad sign that they're going to develop metastases. I think right now still our molecular markers are the best prognostic test.
Thank you. And then my other quick question. So I was diagnosed with radiation retinopathy about like a year after plaque. And thankfully I haven't had much vision loss, but my oncologist just saw like early signs. So I started injections. So if you have radiation retinopathy, are you guaranteed at some point to like lose a significant amount of your vision? Or are there people that like they could be on injections for 20 years and still maintain like most of their vision?
I think that I'm not sure we've been doing injections for radiation retinopathy for 20 years. So I'm like, maybe 10 years, but there are definitely people who've been having injections for a long time that have fairly good vision. I think it's not likely that people will have like 20/20 vision like the rest of their life, even with injections. But I think that if you start it early and you're pretty regular about it, there is a high chance that there's useful vision for like a very long period of time. It's good that, you're being aggressive about it. And I think I don't know. I think optimistically, you may not be needing to get injections once a month for the rest of your life. Like the whole retina community is looking for ways to deliver these medications kind of, longer term. So people with like, it's not just you, people with macular degeneration, people with diabetes, they're all coming in and getting these injections so frequently. And kind of one of the goals is to try to figure out how we can deliver the medications without such frequent injections. So I think that, there will be more coming down the road.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I came in late to this track, but so forgive me if you've addressed this, but for those of us who had the fluid expression around the tumor upon diagnosis, is there a correlation? What's the incidence, and is there a correlation with risk of metastasis?
No. I guess so the fluid as a risk factor is really relevant to the diagnosis of melanoma. Like that's considered one of the risk factors in terms of trying to differentiate between nevus and melanoma. And I guess probably the most relevant work is that Bill Harbour did a study to look at tumors to see whether any of these risk factors that are used to try to help define melanoma, like orange pigment, fluid, symptoms, like all of that, whether there was any correlation between any of those factors and a class 2 gene expression profile. And the bottom line was none. So the only correlation was the age of the patient and the thickness of the tumor. So
thank you.
Yeah.
All right. I think if we have no more questions, let's thank Dr. Kim for a great presentation. And now I think some of these questions were leading us to our next speaker. We've tried to plan the agenda. Hopefully you can tell by the patient journey. So really starting with primary disease. Now we're going to hear from Dr. Sullivan about surveillance and adjuvant therapy. And then we'll head into lunch. And then after lunch, we'll talk more about the disease in other parts of the body and metastatic disease, et cetera. So I think this is Oh, sorry. And in the other track, we have sexual health and you starting now, or starting a few minutes ago, if they're not running a little behind like us. So if you want to go to that, please do. And then we'll all meet back here for lunch. So in this room, we're going to hear about surveillance and adjuvant treatment by Dr. Ryan Sullivan, who is a medical oncologist at the Massachusetts General Cancer Center. This is one of 3 times, at least, you're going to be able to hear from Dr. Sullivan during the meeting, and you might have a chance to race against him.
I'm going to win.
Tomorrow morning at the Franklin Park Zoo. Just, putting out a few challenges there. So we'll hand it over to you, Dr. Sullivan.
Thank you very much, Dr. Seelig. It's a pleasure to be here. So if you have questions that come to mind in the middle of this, feel free to shout them out or probably raise your hand. The nice thing about this talk is that it's short. The not so nice thing about this talk is it's short because there's not a ton of data supporting the last part of this, which is adjuvant treatment. So let's go. So surveillance, or as I like to call it, looking for trouble. So surveillance is essentially the process of you've completed treatment, definitive treatment for your melanoma, and then based on various pieces of data, you're followed. In my other world is taking care, or other life is taking care of patients with melanoma that arise from your skin. Sometimes if you're diagnosed with melanoma of the skin, you're just followed by your dermatologist. And you never see a surgical oncologist or a medical oncologist. Sometimes you need to see a surgical oncologist and a dermatologist, but not a medical oncologist. And sometimes you get to see all 3. Here, most patients, all patients will continue to be followed by their ophthalmologist. And as you heard from Dr. Kim, that following is really looking to see how effective was the therapy, God forbid, is there any evidence of recurrence, and then managing complications from the treatment. And so that is a form of surveillance. And then the other form of surveillance is really trying to look for disease that spread outside of the eye. So who is at risk? By definition, anybody who's been diagnosed with a cancer that has some risk of spread means that everybody is at risk, but we can be a little bit finer. We put a little finer point on that. But if you take all comers of patients who are diagnosed with melanoma of the eye, particularly of the choroid or ciliary body, the risk of recurrence is probably somewhere in the 20 to 30% range. And if we were just taking all comers who had skin melanoma, they would all have seen a medical oncologist, and some discussion about surveillance would happen with that level of risk. So if we just take all comers, there's risk. Now we can probably be a little bit smarter about that. And we can begin to incorporate additional data that comes in. And so there are some historical data and more contemporary data on molecular testing. And then, of course, there's sort of the old-fashioned, how big is the tumor? What's the height of the tumor? And the larger the diameter or the thicker the height, the higher the risk. Involvement of the ciliary body has a higher risk. So there are certain things about just the way that the cancer presents are associated with a higher risk. And then we can begin to get into some of the molecular testing. So basically a molecular test is anything that requires more than a picture or a measurement. So what are cytogenetics? Cytogenetics are basically looking at the chromosomes and alterations of the chromosomes when you look across the genome. And the interesting thing about uveal melanoma, if you look at many different cancers, if you look at a chromosomal map, it looks like chaos. Like if you look at, like, I don't know, melanoma of the skin or breast cancer or lung cancer or any cancer, and you just look at these are what the chromosomes look like. it usually looks like chaos. There's alterations all over the place. In uveal melanoma, they're very characteristic changes of the chromosomes. And so you can actually, it's easy to test because you can just look at those areas. And you can begin to make some correlations with how well patients do. And so monosomy 3 means that the third chromosome only has one. So we have two chromosomes. Sorry, we have two of every chromosome, except for X and Y if you're a male. And we get one from our mother and one from our father. And so if you only have one chromosome 3, that's associated with bad outcomes. And the gene that's on that chromosome that's particularly associated with bad outcomes is called BAP1. And the likeliest scenario is if you've lost one of those chromosomes, then it doesn't take so much to lose function of any kind of loss of function of important genes on that chromosome, particularly BAP1, makes it more likely that that cancer will come back. And then the chromosomes often have two parts to them. One's what's called P and Q. So that's why it says gain of 8Q and gain of 6Q. So gain of 8Q is bad. So the 8th chromosome is, the 8th chromosome. And if you have increased expression of that chromosome, so there's more copies of that chromosome or that part of the chromosome that's associated with bad outcomes. If you have a gain of copies at the 6Q, it's actually associated with better outcomes. Mutations are another thing that can be looked at, although this is kind of new. This has not been something that's been part of standard follow-up or standard diagnosis for patients. But there are some that seem to be associated with better outcomes, others are associated with bad outcomes, and some that are associated with sort of intermediate outcomes. And then the one that most people have heard of is the DecisionDx-UM test, which is both cytogenetics, mutation analysis, and DecisionDx are obtained through a fine needle aspirate at the time of either plaque therapy or surgical preparation for proton beam radiation. There's class 1, and then they found out at early days that when you started looking at class 1, there were some patients that had worse outcomes, some patients had better outcomes. So then they said class 1A, class 1B, and then class 2. So basically, the lowest risk means that if you're class 1A in the largest database that's out there, you have about a 5 or 10% risk of developing metastases by 5 years. If you're class 1B, that risk goes up to about 20%. If you're class 2, that risk is over 70%. Now, again, there's some things that can modify risk, including tumor size and other things. But that's about as good a staging system. In cancer, we think about staging. That's about as good a staging system you can have because you have low risk, intermediate risk, and high risk, and you can begin to tailor what you do for those patients, specifically looking for trouble in the patients that are most at risk for trouble and looking for trouble less often for patients who are at lower risk. So what are the possible options for surveillance? So blood work, we have nothing proven to save lives, meaning there's no test that's ever been developed that you can do in the blood in patients who are at intermediate, low, or high risk uveal melanoma that's been proven to let us know that the diagnosis is coming and to reduce the risk of it coming back or picking up the recurrence earlier and treating and having that treatment be more effective. Turns out the same for imaging. So there's no studies out there yet that show that doing scans saves lives. But that was particularly true in an era where we didn't actually have effective therapies to manage uveal melanoma. We now have had 2 FDA approvals in the last 3 years of drugs specifically or approaches specifically for patients with uveal melanoma. And one of the drugs, which I'll talk about a little later on, called tebentafusp, actually seems to work better in patients who have less bulky disease. So instead of waiting for somebody to develop symptoms and then find out they have metastatic disease, there probably is something we can do. And so I think if we were to launch a study right now to say, half the patients with melanoma will get surveillance with imaging and the other half will not, we would find that scans actually save lives for patients with uveal melanoma. But we probably will never have data that says that's true, because I don't think it's ethical to do a study like that at this point. Over 80, maybe as high as 90% of patients' first site of metastatic disease is in the liver. And so our imaging approach should reflect that. And so liver imaging is perhaps the most important thing we can do in choosing a type of scan for liver imaging. Should take in that information. Some people will have CAT scans, some people will have ultrasound, some people will have MRIs. I'll tell you what my preference is on a slide or two, but ultimately following with liver imaging is the most important thing that can be done. The chest is probably the second most common place, and more specifically the lungs, where melanoma of the eye comes back. And so there should be some attention paid to that. And then other imaging, we don't tend to do unless there's a symptom. So if a patient has a symptom, I do a lot of MRIs of spines because a lot of people have back pain. And so a lot of people with uveal melanoma will develop back pain. And so I, again, go looking for trouble sometimes in the setting of a very specific symptom. Thankfully, most of the time, those symptoms are just related to some other cause of pain. So here are the recommendations from, I meant to say NCCN, but there's no NCCC. I mean, there may be, but don't Google it because I have no idea what that is. And it could be something terrible. And I don't want to be affiliated with it. So NCCN, what I meant, you can Google that. And then my recommendation. So for low risk patients, the NCCN guidelines say, consider imaging every 12 months for 5 years. And I say consider imaging every 6 to 12 months for 5 years. And the reason I give myself a little wiggle room is there may be something we see on the scan, because everybody, thankfully, comes to me having already had a scan. So they've diagnosed with uveal melanoma, they have imaging of their chest, imaging of their abdomen. And so then the question is, do we need to follow up anything on the scans? One of the problems with doing scans is it often leads us to doing more scans. But sometimes somebody has a little something in their liver or a little something in their lungs. And so those patients, even though they're low risk, I'll probably scan them a little more often initially and then work to scan them less frequently over time. For intermediate risk, they say consider imaging every 6 to 12 months for 10 years. Now, that's okay, but I usually do every 6 months for 5 years and then every year after that. And that's reflected by two things. One, I think if somebody is intermediate risk is like you have a 30 or 40% chance. It's probably like a 20 or 30% chance of this coming back. That's high enough that I don't want to find out about it 5 months too late. And so that's why I do 6 months. I think if you're doing 12-month imaging, you're basically doing that to feel good about yourself as a doctor, feel good about yourself as a patient, but that's probably not going to be enough to pick this up early if that in fact does help. And so for intermediate disease, so the risk is higher. I think there should be a little bit more frequently imaged. And so that's why I recommend that. After that, if there hasn't been recurrence at that point, I think doing annual scans makes sense. But then since a lot of the recurrences will happen early, sort of the risk goes down. And so now you're more in that is probably more, your risk is lower for those next 5 years or beyond. For high risk patients, NCCN says every 3 to 6 months for 5 years, every 6 months for the next 5 years. I do every 3 months visits and scans for 5 years and then every 6 months after that. And I don't ever stop, although when more data comes out, hopefully from the COO data set that Dr. Kim was talking about, it may help us to tailor how frequently we do the surveillance. Now, what I didn't put up on here, because I didn't want to be that provocative, was what does your insurance company recommend? So consider often means don't consider. Every 6 to 12 means every 6 to 12 months almost automatically means every 12 months. And every 3 to 6 months means every 6 months. Sometimes they get cute and they'll say, oh, we'll do 3 months for 3 years, but then after that, we'll do 6 months. So for the high-risk patients. And I'll say, well, have you looked at the slope of the curve between years 1 and 3 or 0 and 3 in years 3 to 5? They're the same. Why should I be scanning this person any less frequently? And they say, well, that's the policy and we can't go against the policy. If you'd like to write a letter, we'll send it in the information in our denial. The sad truth is that the insurance companies will often fight this, both the NCCN guidelines, or they'll read into the NCCN guidelines the sort of least that they can do or they have to do. And so that's one of the things that we'll just continue to fight on your behalf to try and get those scans when we think they should be done. Any questions about timing of surveillance? Because I think, yes. It's a good question. We don't. So I'm sorry. So the question was, since there may be a bump in recurrence between 8 and 10 years, do we think about scanning more frequently in that time frame? We don't tend to, although the reason that for intermediate risk and high risk patients, I don't really change what I'm doing or why I continue to scan patients beyond 5 years, is because I do worry about later recurrences. The reason for intermediate risk and high risk, I don't say until 10 years, is because we see patients 15 years later, 20 years later, 25 years later. And a lot of times those patients have very large tumors that clearly would have been detected on annual imaging. And so I think what's interesting, and I don't know what this looks like, and maybe this is something that we should look at a little bit more, is a lot of the later recurrences are in one site of one tumor that's growing probably relatively slowly, as opposed to sometimes what we see are patients who have who present with many different sites of metastatic disease. I think that happens with the earlier recurrences more commonly than that. And so I think annual or every 6-month scans will probably be okay for those recurrences. But if there's data out there that I'm missing, or if we learn something new that should change my mind, I'm very willing to change my mind on that. It's a good point. Yes.
I just want to step back for a second. You said on blood work, there was no.
Just stepping back, talking about the no proven save lives, but when you talk about the liver imaging, I just wondered if there's any correlation between liver labs, a liver profile and the imaging.
Yeah. So in fairness, some of my patients are in the room, I get labs every time that people come in. And I check an LDH, which is probably useless because by the time the LDH is elevated, you're going to see it on a scan. That's probably true with liver function testing. To have altered liver function testing, you'll probably see it on a scan. But I still do it because I figure it's something I can do and we could talk about, and it's usually going to be okay. But I think it's a good question. We often do things because sometimes we find something that's a little, maybe 1 or 2% of the time that blood work turns out to be useful. And so I think what we don't, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about this on Sunday, I think the types of blood work that we might be able to do in the future are looking at tumor DNA blood work. And I think that may end up being a better test than probably most of these things that are here. Like probably ctDNA and liver MRI can help us work with the insurance companies and NCCN to make everybody feel good that we're making cost-effective decisions on behalf of our patients that our, payers can agree on.
Good point. Thank you very much.
Sure. All right. Any other questions before I go to the next part. So the next part, so I figured I'd start with a glossary of terms. Because while some of you may know what adjuvant therapy is, there's a lot of medical residents that have no idea what adjuvant therapy is, and sometimes they still have to look it up. So here are 3 terms related to therapy to cure patients of their cancer. So curative intent therapy is any surgery. So that could be an enucleation in the case of patients with uveal melanoma, or treatment, which could be radiation, proton beam or plaque-based therapy, or gamma knife therapy. Or sometimes we use chemotherapy with radiation as a definitive curative intent therapy, or chemotherapy sometimes we use. But in any event, curative intent surgery or curative intent therapy is any treatment with the express purpose of curing that patient, knowing that you're not curing everybody, but you're attempting to cure. And so that's curative intent therapy. Now that's important because adjuvant therapy is some sort of treatment given after curative intent therapy to improve the chance of cure. Questions? Is that clear? Okay, there's gonna be a test afterwards. Neoadjuvant therapy. Actually, there's a test for anybody who doesn't beat me tomorrow in the race. Neoadjuvant therapy is treatment given before curative intent therapy to improve the chance of cure. Why is it called neoadjuvant therapy? I have no idea. Like, I don't know what's new about it. Like, adjuvant therapy is what it is. Neoadjuvant therapy shouldn't be before. I don't know. I'm not going to get into that's as much of the entomology as I'm going to get into. All right, so that's neoadjuvant therapy. And then sometimes you'll hear the word perioperative therapy. And perioperative therapy is treatment given before and after curative intent therapy to improve the chance of cure. So that's the glossary of terms that may or may not help you with the next 3 slides. Any questions on that? Okay. So does adjuvant therapy work in melanoma? So I've summarized skin cancer or skin melanoma, melanoma that arises on mucosal surfaces, which are the lining surfaces of our body, and then uveal melanoma. These are the drugs for which there are randomized trials, either demonstrating that it works or doesn't work. The only one where there's a crossed out one is where it doesn't work, which is chemotherapy for uveal melanoma. So there are a number of trials that have been done that have proven that in randomized trial, and the sort of the best studies that we can do in patients who are at risk of not being cured, that have been shown in these studies to improve the cure rate, or at least reduce the recurrence rate of patients with melanoma. So a long list with cutaneous melanoma, shorter list with mucosal melanoma, and a list with a line in it. Yes. Yeah, so TIL therapy, great question. So TIL therapy is otherwise, so the question is, what about TIL therapy? So TIL therapy is a treatment for patients with metastatic cancer, where you remove that, and all the patients that were on the TIL study trials had other metastatic cancer sites too. So that's not in this setting, because adjuvant therapy is for patients who've had the curative intent treatment and then are getting something else afterwards to improve the cure rate. So TIL therapy is something, if we were talking about metastatic cancer, we would talk about TIL therapy. Thank you for that question. Okay, so we know it can work. And these are, again, positive randomized data for each of these treatments or combinations. So these are the FDA-approved treatments in melanoma generally, in the adjuvant setting, and these are the FDA-approved treatments for patients with uveal melanoma. I didn't mess the slide up, so there aren't any. There have been some studies, and so there's a lot of words on this, and most of them are negative. But so these are 7 trials that there's reports out on. Some are papers and one is it's just a presentation from 7 years ago. So DTIC is a chemotherapy. IFN is interferon, which is a old school immune therapy. And the combination of those 2 things didn't work. So it was considered negative. Now the control, right? So one of these is randomized. All the others are sort of comparing against something that's not a group of the same people going into and registering for the study and then being assigned one thing versus another thing. So the control was were the 29 patients they offered the trial to, but who didn't want to go on the study. They actually initially had a positive, like the data, they actually had to go to great lengths in the abstract in the paper to describe how it wasn't positive, because it looked like the treatment was associated with better outcomes. And then when they started controlling for the variables that are associated with worse outcomes, they realized it wasn't a positive study. It was a negative study that didn't offer any benefit. IFN, so that's interferon. This is a case control study. This is actually at Mass Eye and Ear, and dead negative. So this was 121 patients who received adjuvant interferon compared to case control of patients. When you do case control, you're trying to control the variables that you think are associated with bad outcomes. So size of tumor, height of tumor, any other potential things. That this trial was done a long time ago, so we didn't have molecular analysis. We certainly didn't have Castle testing. That was a negative trial. Now, interestingly, interferon had a few positive trials in skin melanoma. So it was logical to test it in eye melanoma, but it unfortunately never, or fortunately, depending on those who may have had interferon and would say, I wouldn't give that to my worst enemy, but it wasn't an option. Photomustine, not TEEB. Photomustine is a chemotherapy, and this is fascinating. This is an intravenous therapy that 244 patients were enrolled. I think it was planning to be like a 300 and 350 patient study. It was randomized. It was done in France. They amazingly were able to, over probably a 5 or 6 year period, randomize almost 250 patients to this study. They had an early look at the data and it was negative. And so this group called the Data Safety Monitoring Board closed the trial for futility and said, this drug doesn't work. Please close this trial. Now, it was randomized to being observed. So this was not blinded study, but a randomized trial. All the same patients that are going into it, and you can control, you just randomize who gets what. So you can't control that, but you can at least begin to look across those. And you tend to have a more mirrored group than these other types of controls. IH means intrahepatic. So as I mentioned, the liver is a very common place of metastasis in patients with high risk uveal melanoma. So this was a trial where they said, you're at high risk of there being cancer in your liver at some point. Let's put some chemotherapy in the arteries leading to your liver and see how it goes. Toxic. So there's a lot of side effects, way more toxic than the match control who didn't get it. And equivocal. They couldn't really say much about it because they couldn't say it helped. They couldn't say it didn't help. They sort of said, might help a little bit, but it's really toxic. And so that was in 2008, and you've never heard of it again. So obviously that wasn't built upon. Sunitinib. Sunitinib is a pill, FDA approved initially for kidney cancer. It's probably approved for GIST, which is a type of stomach cancer. I don't know if it's approved for anything else. In any event, this was a trial where patients, single center, 74 eligible patients received it. 54% patients received it, 74 patients didn't receive it. And then they also looked at institutional historical controls, and they called this a positive trial. But the problem is there may have been reasons why patients didn't want to do it. And it was a single institution. And so positive trials on single-arm studies when you're comparing to institutional controls. And there were patients that were theoretically eligible but didn't go on it, are hard to interpret. So I've had a lot of patients come to me and say, what do you think of the sunitinib data? Should I get sunitinib? And I'd say, I don't think so. It's got a lot of side effects, and the data, it's not the right study to make conclusions from. And so I don't tend to do it. Ipilimumab is a drug that's FDA approved for skin melanoma. We give it all the time to patients. But eye melanoma, 10-patient study, no control, promising, because 80% of the patients hadn't recurred, even though it was only 8 of 10 patients. Too small to make any interpretation on. And then crizotinib, which is another pill that's approved for other types of cancers, including a subset of lung cancers, was negative. And here they did 34 patients and they compared it to a historical control. But this historical control was interesting. It was merged from a lot of different centers. It probably was more robust than any of the other controls other than the randomized study. And it actually was a good way of doing a small study to see if there's any signal at all to then move forward with a randomized trial. But unfortunately, it was negative. Now, there's 5 studies that I could, or 4 I could find on clinicaltrials.gov. One that I know existed because it did. I think it's being presented at our annual meeting at ASCO this year. That's the last one where there's a big question mark, so I couldn't find the clinicaltrials.gov now. So there was a trial of sunitinib versus valproic acid. There was some valproic acid is actually an anti-seizure medicine. And this trial, they dropped ultimately the valproic acid arm because they didn't think it helped. Sutent seemed to be better than valproic acid. The trial data isn't available. Darvosertib is a new drug that blocks the pathway. You'll hear more about this, I think, from Dr. Hawk later. It's a drug that blocks the signaling from the G protein coupled receptor mutations, GNAQ and GNA11, and perhaps some of the others that help to drive uveal melanoma. They're doing a study now where they're doing peri-op, so before surgery or radiation, and seeing whether or not it has effect on reducing the size. So if you were an operative candidate, meaning your ophthalmologist thought you needed to have that eye removed because radiation wasn't going to help you, could you actually spare some patients enucleation? Seems like a worthy goal. Peri-radiation is they're trying to reduce the tumor so that there's less radiation to the eye. Also a worthy goal, although we don't really know whether that will improve outcomes, but I think it's fair to do a study like this. There's talk of a tebentafusp. We'll hear more about tebentafusp this afternoon as well. This is one of the 2 FDA-approved drugs specifically for uveal melanoma. And that trial is definitely going to happen in Europe, and it's probably going to happen in a few centers in the States. Melatonin, I don't know if that's going to help, but patients will sleep better, get the melatonin. And then finally, there's a completed study of ipilimumab and nivolumab that I think is going to be presented this year at conferences, which was in high-risk uveal melanoma patients who got the combination of those 2 immunotherapies that are approved for melanoma. Okay, so I think there's a problem with almost all those trials and these, but not all. And so, so I have 4 things that I think we should be doing better. Just check to make sure I'm not keeping you from lunch. So the first thing we can do to have more success is to actually pick drugs that work in the metastatic cancer. If it's been proven to help patients with that type of cancer, maybe it will work at preventing relapse in patients who are at high risk for that cancer. If it doesn't, so number 2, if you can't do number 1, pick drugs that make sense. Novel vaccines, like it may make sense for that setting. Maybe a vaccine will take too long to work in the metastatic setting, but maybe it can work in this type of setting. Or there's preclinical data, which usually means animal studies, that support it in this setting. Like, oh no, the way it works is it blocks tumors from metastasizing by X, Y, or Z mechanism. And that's why we think the best setting is to give it in patients who've had their definitive therapy and you're trying to improve their cure rate. Outside of that, just saying this works in uveal melanoma cells, let's put it in this setting, I think we'll probably do those trials because it's something we can offer to patients, and maybe there'll be some targets that are more exciting than others. But we'll be less excited about those than if it's number one. For this, the second, the third, and the fifth qualify for that there's some efficacy or activity in patients with metastatic disease, and it's something that we can consider. Number 1 and number 4 don't meet that bar. Again, unless you're having trouble falling asleep, and then the melatonin is probably fine. Number 3, randomized data is always better. There are no trials, or sorry, there are no FDA-approved adjuvant therapies in melanoma or breast cancer or kidney cancer or lung cancer or any other cancer that haven't been tested in a randomized study. The FDA will not do it. They'll not. It's particularly in an adjuvant setting. They just won't. And it's fair of them not to. So I think if you can't do that, should be a reason for it. So number 4 is if you can't do 3, maybe we're not sure, we think this drug can help in this setting. We want to do a small study to show whether or not it makes sense to spend millions upon millions of dollars to do number 3, the randomized study. I think that's perfectly reasonable and rational. But you'll never get a drug approved in this setting, at least in the next probably 10 or 20 years, without doing a randomized trial. And I know patients hate randomized trials, particularly placebo-based randomized trials. And I get it. But there's a lot of drugs that didn't get approved, that they had every reason to think it was going to be a good idea, and it turned out to be more toxic and not helpful. And if we didn't do that, we would be hurting more patients than we'd be helping. And so I'll get off my soapbox now about randomized studies, but the reason I believe in it is it's because it's the only way we're going to help patients in 5 years and 10 years down the road, and really the field in general. All right. With that, I mentioned that these measure up. You can't even see the melatonin one in there because it went to sleep, although I promise you can see it up here. If you want to see it later, sleepy time melatonin is on here. So with that, I'll thank you. I would say this is one of my greatest days. I went to Treehouse Brewery and bought 7 cases of beer. And somebody said I won the brewery that day, but okay, I'm happy to answer any other questions, or I'm also happy to release you for lunch. Thank you.
Thank you. There is a question online I'm going to read. Dr. Sullivan, what does PRAME mean on your first surveillance slide?
Oh yeah, good question. So PRAME is something that is now being tested as part of the Castle testing. PRAME is a little piece of protein that gets expressed on the surface of cancer cells. Most melanomas express PRAME. And so the level of expression is associated with worse outcomes, we think. And so it has now been included in the DecisionDx-UM. So if you have a DecisionDx-UM, it'll likely say PRAME positive or PRAME negative. Most will say PRAME positive because most people are PRAME positive. So it's not clear to me how useful that's ultimately going to be. But it's something that you may see there. So I didn't put a risk category associated with it because it may be associated with higher risk. But for example, somebody was 1A PRAME positive, I'm not sure what that means. Just like I'm not sure class 2 PRAME positive means anything because I'm not sure the risks are going to be that different. I think we need more time, but I put it there because people may have that test result and it may say it. But PRAME positive is probably associated with a worse outcome, although we're not entirely sure of how profoundly.
I'm going to be a little bit provocative
Okay.
here, if you don't mind. So if you're going to do your perfect adjuvant trial, I presume you would choose high-risk patients.
Yes.
And you know that some parts of the world don't use gene expression profiling.
Mhm.
And so I wonder how you would define that patient population, particularly around the intermediate groups like the SF3B1, for example, et
Yep.
cetera. So if you had to do a global study, what would the patient population be that you would choose?
So the French study did cytogenetics, and they picked high-risk patients based on monosomy 3 and gain of 8q. Most of the world outside the US, if they're going to do a molecular test, they're going to do cytogenetics. It's actually cheaper, and it's pretty good. A lot of the trials that are written right now, where they're trying to identify the high-risk groups, they'll say high risk based on cytogenetics, and they'll list monosomy 3 and 8q gain, or Decision DX class 2. Those are probably, and then sometimes they'll say, or T4 tumor, so, essentially they're trying to, particularly larger trials that are going to be international studies, are trying to take into account the fact that Decision DX may not be the only way of sorting out who's at high risk, and trying to allow, because the last thing you want to do if you're really trying to enroll a lot of patients and answer the question is to have delays because the folks aren't used to sending the test that needs to be sent, and then you have to send it, you have to work with the groups that you're recruiting patients for those studies. And so that's how they've tried to get around that, is to allow for there to be several different ways of defining high risk.
Yeah, that's exactly what we've done, but it still gets back to what do you think about the class 1B or the SF3B1s? Are they bad enough where you'd include them?
My guess is that the initial studies have to be done in the higher risk groups, because you're going to be way easier to identify whether or not that's effective. Once you've identified that it's effective in that group, then I think you can incorporate intermediate. You could probably incorporate sort of good to intermediate too. There may be ways of doing that, but the intermediate is certainly bad enough that we worry about them, we scan them, and we'd love to have something to reduce that risk. But the length of time that this trial would take if you include intermediate patients would probably double. And ultimately, we want to find out as quickly as possible, is this something that's useful that we can then roll out to our patients with bad risk? And at that same time, then begin to study it in intermediate risk.
Great, thanks.
Sure. All right, thanks, everybody.
Yeah.
It is officially lunchtime, and we will be starting back up for tracks 1 and 2 at 1:30.